It's a work session tonight, which means our procedures are a little more informal. We do not make formal decisions at work sessions except to give direction to staff. So we dispense with some of the formalities, but we think you'll find tonight to be a particularly interesting evening. We have two items on our agenda tonight. The first is dealing with all things police. Both the Polk Police Services Survey and the CPSM Center for Public Safety Management report, both of which are very detailed. I had some prepared comments, but my failing computer is not giving those to me, so I'm going to try to wing it. By way of introducing these items, I'm going to turn it over to Chris Kukulski in just a moment to introduce item 1 and anything else that you'd like to comment on. The important thing, I think, for the public to know is that the Billings City Council has determined that public safety is our top priority. It's been saying that now for several years. The reality is, though, that it's relatively easy to say that, especially when it's virtually undeniable. We've had an increase in our violent crime rate and our property crime rate that has more than doubled in about the last 10 years. So tonight, we have an opportunity to dig deep, not just to describe the problem, but to look for solutions. The problem is that this is easier said than done, and it's a very complicated jigsaw puzzle. Tonight, we have an opportunity to look at two parts of that puzzle. One is, what do our citizens perceive to be the problem? What are the citizens' priorities, and what are their attitudes towards our police force? That's one. And then second, we have an opportunity to hear from some true experts in this country who've spent decades studying these issues and also worked in policing and examining best practices from around the country. They have given us very detailed recommendations. I think we can agree that sometimes those recommendations have also been unvarnished and not afraid to tell us of our own challenges. And in my mind, that adds to their credibility. I think anybody who has looked at the reports, and Chris Kukulski, if you can make a note just to remind anybody who's listening how they can make sure to get these reports, even while we are listening on the city's website. But I think anybody who reads it will have to agree that these are extremely professional and detailed, and hence valuable and credible. So in case I forget to say so to our consultant team and all of our staff members of the Billings police force and others who've worked hard on these reports, thank you for your hard work. And special shout out to city attorney, that would be a major demotion, no offense, Gina Dahl, but city administrator Chris Kukulski. I wouldn't wish that job on anybody, including you, Chris. You've driven a lot of this, and you've seen the priority that this has to be and the importance of this. So thank you very much. And your right-hand man and former police captain, Kevin Iflin, your expertise has been undoubtedly incredibly valuable in this process. So thank you. I'll turn it over to Chris just a minute, just a word of advice or two for members of the public who might be listening. We will have an opportunity for public comment, and we do value your comments at the end of item 1. Item 1 will consist of hearing the presentation by our consulting team and also Chief St. John, any other city employees, first on the Polko survey, and then the council members will have an opportunity to ask questions of the consulting team and any other city presenters. We will then turn it to the CPSM consulting team, hear their report, I know Chief St. John will also have comments and report. We'll hear from him, and then turn it back to City Council for their questions. Once we've had the presentations and Council's had an opportunity to ask questions on each of the two reports, we'll open it up for public comment. So at that stage, members of the public, you might want to write down this telephone number. And don't call now, but call later. That number will be 237-6196. Again, 237-6196. We'll ask that you keep your comments to less than 3 minutes and just tell us your name and address up front. And we'll hear from the public. And then after public comment period has closed, we will turn it back to the consulting team, staff, to comment on anything they might have heard during the public comment period, and also back to the City Council in case City Council has further questions or would like to carry on our discussion. Just a reminder that this is a work session, so it's unlikely that we would give any specific direction to staff tonight. Staff has told us they would like to come back and ask for further instruction in a more structured way at a regular meeting of the City Council at some point in the future. And Chris Kukulski can go into that in greater depth. So hopefully that lets you know what the plan is for tonight. The second item, when we're done with that, is our legislative update to hear what's going on in Helena. We hope to take a break probably around 7:30. That'll be about a 5 to 10 minute break, and then we'll be back at it. Last word of advice for everybody, especially the police types out there. If you can go light on the acronyms, we would appreciate that, or at least explain what they are. If it were up to me, we would ban all acronyms in the USA. When you get that, you can laugh when it hits you. So Chris Kukulski, City Administrator, would you like to introduce the first item and add or subtract from anything I've said?
Mayor, as you nailed it. So before we get into this, I do want to just voice a voice of appreciation. This weekend, thankfully, there weren't any lives lost, but you're all aware there was a 30-car pileup just east of town on the Lockwood Bridge coming into Billings on I-90. Montana Highway Patrol, Lockwood Fire Department, Billings Fire Department, Billings PD, AMR, all, and I'm sure, unfortunately, maybe I'm missing somebody, but those are the main agencies that handled that horrific situation. What I think it speaks to, though, is these folks, women and men, are very well trained at what they do. And they plan, whether you know it or not, right? A Met Transit bus doesn't show up an emergency this size to get a group of people to the hospital by accident. So these folks did a phenomenal job helping those who were in need Saturday morning. And I just want to thank all of those first responders for their work and their help, and making it seem seamless for those of us on the administrative side of the house, though I'm sure if you were in the middle of it, as the photos indicate, there was nothing seamless about it at all as it was going on. So just a thank you to them. Now with that, Mayor, thank you for the introduction. You nailed the outline. All the notes I had, you covered them in spades, so thank you. I would only add, Tom and I've known Tom. I'm getting older now. Tom and I, when I was in Michigan, so 25 years ago, Tom and I got to work a little bit together, but it took 25 years for me to one day, I think, call him up and say, I am in desperate need. I am way over my head trying to figure out how to deal with the crime issues that my community is facing. And as the mayor pointed out, it's just unfortunate truth, right? You go back just 12 or 15 years, and Billings, like Montana, was well below the national average in most of these statistics. Much of Montana has remained there, but unfortunately for Billings and a few other cities, we've not. So I'm very grateful to the professionalism. I think this report is one of the most professional, clearest, easiest to follow and understand, though most of it is operational, right? Most of it is administrative for the chief and I, but it has absolute serious policy implications. So my goal tonight is first for the council, as the mayor kind of teed up on the POCO survey, to understand what is our community telling us. You know, we all are smart enough to have opinions about what we think the 110,000 citizens of Billings think, but this really is a statistically valid quality survey that I'm looking forward to Michelle and Demema outlining for you guys and answering your questions so that we can use that data in this upcoming year. And then secondly, we'll get over to Tom and his team with CPSM on really the nuts and bolts of the police department and recommendations they have there. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tom, and we'll cover the POCO first. So thanks, Tom.
Hey, and Chris,
okay, thank you, Chris.
I apologize for interrupting. Chris, can you just remind members of the public how they can get these reports even while we speak?
I'm sorry, you said that, Mayor, and I missed it. So if they want to go to billingsmt.gov, whether they go to the normal packet process, they can pull them both out of tonight's packet, or just on our front webpage. The city's front page, one of the top stories there, has both the POCO survey report and the Center for Public Safety Management report there at billingsmt.gov. Thanks, Mayor. And Tom,
Thank you.
I'll turn it over to you for you and your introduction and your team.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Mr. Mayor, members of council. First off, I'd like to thank you for all the work that your team did so that this report could come to fruition. You were one of the first cities to participate with POCO and CPSM. We had been working and talking for a number of years. And then, of course, in the last year, the George Floyd and other incidents kind of drove home the point that our work in and of itself often lacked the community input. And so we worked with POCO. They, at the same time, were developing the National Police Services Survey. And you were one of the first participants to incorporate both of those into a finished product. And so we're very happy with the outcome. We're very happy with the cooperation we received. And I think as a result, we'll be able to provide you with a great deal of input as you move forward. And it's my pleasure right now to turn this over to Michelle Kobayashi from POCO. And Michelle, it's all yours.
Great. Thank you so much. Also, thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council, for having us. And also want to say thank you to Tom and the CPSM team. We love working with them. I want to echo the mayor's comments that they have a ton of information. So I love talking with Tom about community policing because he has an insight that most folks do not when we're talking about the challenges we face today. But I'm going to share my screen because I'm going to give a presentation. We actually did the National Police Services Survey in your community. You're one of the first 5 communities to actually do this survey. And so, again, want to applaud you all for taking that first step of really reaching out to residents and getting their perceptions as part of your evaluation of your services and making sure that they're heard and feel like they have a voice in kind of community decision making. We know you're not a stranger to this. We have worked with Billings, Montana, I think since 2009, doing your community survey. So you've always kind of been innovative in terms of including residents into your decision making process and also kind of being transparent and accountable in that way. So again, you're kind of leading the way in terms of doing this in the police services area as well. I'm going to share my screen and then I'll blow it up once I get it open. Share, and then here we go. Okay. Does everybody see it okay? Good.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thanks. So, again, thank you for having us present today. I'm here with my colleague, Demema Mann. Demema actually has been the project manager on many of your community surveys in the past and has a historical context of Billings and just the community-wide data we've been collecting over years for your community. So COVID-19 has turned our communities upside down. We're all struggling trying to figure out what's going on. And some of the issues that have come out of COVID-19 may have been brewing before, but also have really come to a head. And we kind of have a chasm in our country right now when it comes to a number of issues. But community policing is one of those hot topics that we've seen come up in the last couple of years. However, those of us that have been in local government for a long time, and I should say I actually have been in local government 30 years. I started my career in 1989 working for local government as a researcher and evaluator and helped form National Research Center. So I've been doing this kind of work for about 30 years in terms of measuring resident preferences, doing surveys, and doing evaluations of programs in local government. But anyways, we had developed the National Community Survey about 25 years ago, and that's a survey of community livability that you guys have done 3 or 4 times, I believe. And basically, we asked residents to rate how, community livability, but also the services provided by the city. And what we found when we used to do the study 20 years ago, I found the top rated services were always fire, police, trash, libraries. Everybody loved those services across the nation, and they never liked streets and planning and economic development. It was just kind of the way it was. Well, what we noticed about 10 years ago or so is that in some communities, police services were starting to not score so high. We found some communities where they still scored very, very high, and others they were starting to drop. At the same time, we had introduced a survey called the National Employee Survey, where we asked local government employees to rate how satisfied and engaged they are in their jobs. And starting to implement that, I would go do a lot of workshops with communities and found that time and time again, it was the police department that was the least satisfied with their jobs. It was the police that were struggling the most. So we started to see there's kind of an area or a chasm growing in America in terms of some communities about how we were seeing our police officers and also how they were seeing their role in the community and their satisfaction. That, along with a number of our clients who kept asking us to develop a survey on police services, we decided to do that in 2017. So we teamed with the Bureau of Justice executive team, so a group of national police officers, and actually developed the survey based on also surveys we had done with a lot of communities and police departments, but tried to develop a survey that really looked at what residents could perceive in terms of safety, also how they would rate the services provided and how much trust they put in their police services. We also asked them about their priorities to try to get folks involved in identifying where we could move forward. So we call it the National Police Services Survey. And the goal of it was really to assess resident perceptions of safety, gauge the quality of the resident interactions with police, evaluate public services, measure public trust, and again, ID those public safety priorities. When we did it at Billings, we basically did it in October and November. And we basically sent out 3,000 mailings to households and asked people to participate. We had 3 waves, a multi-wave study, sending out 3 times, reminding people to complete the survey. Of the 3,000 we sent out, we got about 503 responses back, a response rate of 17%. We also had an open participation survey that we launched in November. So we let anyone who's in the public actually come online and answer the survey questions as well, because we thought it's really interesting to see we get the scientific survey responses, but we also hear from those folks who actually wanted a chance to really also give their opinion, and we can look at those, and we have both those reports available for you. For the scientific survey, we statistically weighted the data to better reflect Billings, and then in this report, you'll see that we compare it to national benchmarks. And the national benchmarks we have is we developed the tool in 2017, 2018 with the public safety community. And then we actually did a national study. So we got data from across the country to start our benchmark database. We then redid the survey in 2020, the summer of 2020. So definitely have different opinions than we saw across the nation after George Floyd and some of the events that happened. We have those data we use as benchmarks, and we're comparing you to that in the report. The one thing I want to caution you about is because we have had a lot of national press and a lot of issues related to public safety right now, we are not sure how those benchmarks will change over time. So you'll have to think as a community how much you think those are valuable to you right now, but I do think they give us a lot of context. And also, we don't know with COVID. We don't know with COVID how it's affecting national benchmarks. So we could see that people are more negative, more positive. We're not sure how people are perceiving their communities and their public safety efforts, just given what's happened in all of our lives right now. That said, I think our benchmarks are quite strong. I just wanted to let you know that given the context in the last 6 months, year, it's not probably as, it may not be as accurate as you'd like for it to be a fair comparison. Next slide, please. Oh, I'm doing it myself, sorry. So one of the things I talked about is how we developed this instrument. Basically, we had taken a lot of the instruments we had developed with police departments. We talked to a lot of experts in the public safety field. And I also did a really significant literature review about all the types of things that folks give police departments' advice on what they should be involved in, what they should do right, what are their areas of jurisdiction. So that's where we shaped this survey. We also did lots of pilot testing and have some really strong methodology behind it. So I'm going to talk about the results. What we found was when we asked residents of Billings to say what their overall safety in the community is, we found about 63% of folks rated the safety as excellent or good. That is a piece of information, or that data point is below the nation. People in Billings, Montana were saying that they feel less safe than other communities. What we know from looking at the National Community Survey is we saw a trend. I looked at your old data, and starting in 2009, the safety levels were much higher, and it has moved over the years till the last survey we did in 2016. So these perceptions of safety have been changing, and I think the mayor had talked a little bit about that, or the city manager, before we started this presentation. We also asked specifically where people feel the most safe and least safe, or we actually asked them to rate how safe they feel in various community areas. And what we find, that people feel pretty safe in their neighborhood at day, even at night, in their major recreational areas at day. What we see is and those are actually similar rates to the nation. But what we find is the downtown commercial area at night and your recreational areas at night, those get very low ratings in terms of how safe people feel in those areas. And those are much lower than we see in the national norms or benchmarks in terms of how people perceive their safety in those two areas. We also ask about 35 different issues that we believe are related to community policing and safety, and how what influence their resident safety ratings. And then we ask them how much this is a problem in your area, and they can rate it on the scale of major problem, moderate problem, slight problem, not a problem. And what we found, I have them ranked here, the top ones on this board, in terms of what were felt to be the biggest problems or issues in Billings. And what we see is drug abuse, burglaries, thefts, homelessness, DUIs. Then the next tier we kind of have is domestic violence, child abuse, human trafficking. And then kind of the third tier is gun violence, traffic problems, homicide, graffiti. All of these were significantly higher than what other communities across the nation, our residents across the nation, have rated in their communities. And again, these data, I think, are similar to some of the stuff I've at least seen when I read online about the number of safety issues you have in the community and what the CPSM report finds. When we compare them to the national benchmarks, and again, that's what I'm saying, whether that's 100% fair comparison right now, it's up to you to decide. But we did find that in almost every area, 31 of the 40 ways we can compare you, residents are feeling less safe and feeling like crime issues are a bigger problem in your community. In 9 areas, you were similar, but you didn't have any areas where residents perceived you as more safe or crime issues as less of a problem than we see across the nation. However, even though those news, may not be new news to you, because I've heard that this is a priority for you, one of the really positive things we found in the survey is that in terms of community policing, though, your residents are very supportive. So what we found when we asked about the overall quality of services in Billings, or police services in Billings, we found about 76 or 3/4 of the residents are giving excellent and good ratings. And that's much higher than we find in the national benchmarks across the nation. We also asked about 17 different services provided by the police, and I'm just listing the highest and lowest rated. You can see the other reports online, but where the police are felt to excel here in the community is managing political protests, working to increase school safety, maintaining public order. The areas where they get lower ratings is showing citizens how to work together on neighborhood problems, working with people to solve the neighborhood problems, and drug enforcement. Those were rated as excellent or good by less than 50% of residents. However, in all of the cases except these 3 in the lowest rated, you're significantly above the nation in terms of residents thinking the police are doing a good job. These ones in the right-hand column, those are areas where they're similar to the nation. So in none of these 17 services did Billings residents believe the police fell below the national rating. We also ask about public trust. And these are some of the issues that's been obviously emerging across the country in the last 6 months or so, or 8 months, asking if they really trust the cops to be doing the right thing. And what we found on most of the things we asked about, in fact, all things we asked about, at least 60% of residents gave the Billings police an excellent or good rating. But for the ones listed on the screen, we have at least 7 and 10, and sometimes we have 8 and 10 residents giving the Billings police good ratings in terms of acting within the law, being trustworthy, being a positive influence, using the appropriate amount of force. And these ratings also are significantly above the nation. So the residents of Billings are feeling more trustful of their police than we see across the country today. We also asked folks, because a lot of trust and service provision and the perceptions of residents of safety can be influenced by not only personal experience, but also the media, friends, neighbors. So we did ask those folks, have you had contact with the police department? And then we asked those folks why they were in contact, and then asked them to rate the police officers, thinking that some of that information can give you a little bit more insight into how that customer service and those relationships work. And what we found is in Billings, about half of the people who responded to the survey had reported contact with the police department. And that's actually exactly what we found in our national studies. That's about the same amount. So your cops are interacting less or more than we've seen in other studies. The most common reason we found is they called or sought information from the police, they had a casual encounter with the police, or they reported a crime to the police. But again, in the report, you can see some of the other reasons why people are in contact with your police department. And what we find is those folks, we ask again, please rate your most recent contact in terms of, customer service model. Did they treat you respectfully? Were they fair? Were they knowledgeable? Were they timely? And what we found is at least 3 and 4 of those folks who had contact with the police rated the officer or the staff interaction as excellent or good. And their overall impression for the police officer they interacted with was 82% gave it excellent or good. And again, these ratings are much higher than the rest of the nation in terms of their ratings of their satisfaction with their police. So when we compare Billings in terms of police services and satisfaction with police services and public trust, what we find is for a high majority of these ratings, your police officers and team is getting rated above the nation. 6-year similar, and in no areas was your police department rated lower than the nation. Now, not everybody perceives police services the same, and we've seen that nationally, and we also see it at the community level. So one of the things we also do with the MPSS is actually compare the responses of folks from different backgrounds by age, by household type, by income, by race, ethnicity, by gender, to see if there's areas to help communities dig deeper. Are there areas we need to do better outreach with? Are there areas we need to listen to folks more and figure out solutions? And so we actually did those kinds of analyses for Billings. You have a disparity report within your results. You can look and see by all the different kinds of resident backgrounds, how that varies. We also have your ward data too, for those of you who are interested in looking at, counselors in your wards. You can see it broken by your own data as well. But what we found in terms of data being statistically significant, most of them were not statistically significant. You might see like a 6% or 8% point spread, but given the sample sizes, often that's not reaching the level of true statistical significance. The areas where we really did find differences had to do with age and tenure. Tenure is whether you live in a rental unit or a owner-occupied housing unit. And that may seem kind of odd to folks, but what we know from doing research over the last 30 years, being a renter versus an owner, it often kind of characterizes a cluster of different characteristics. So it might be people newer, younger to the community, more transient, not as involved. So we actually often see big differences in that category. That's why we statistically weight our data often on it. But I wanted to show the 2 slides for the areas where we see more statistical significance. And what we find, here's the differences by age. So you can see that the younger residents are not nearly as happy as the older residents in the community. And again, I think this is probably what we see nationally as well. So those young people having stronger opinions about their trust with the police and the services provided. We also see, here's by tenure. So again, the renters, and again, it might be because some of the folks are young, but it's also probably a cluster of other characteristics, make them not give us high ratings as we see those single family homeowners who seem to be more supportive of the work the police are doing. So those are some areas to look at. Now, an interesting question I think everybody thinks is race would come up with a difference that would be significant. And it does in communities where we actually have larger populations of African Americans. In Billings, what we found is you're actually the people of color. We had to group them all together so we could protect confidentiality because you have smaller numbers of ethnic residents. We found actually the people of color in Billings gave higher ratings. They weren't statistically significant, but they weren't showing lower. But again, I think if we look at some of the data we have from the nation, it tends to be that it's African-American Black residents seem to be more dissatisfied, while we're finding some of the members of the Hispanic communities and Asian communities actually can be more supportive than white residents. So just some interesting information. But again, we didn't have a huge number of non-white folks in the sample to kind of look at these differences really closely. Then my final slide is about safety priorities. One of the things, we can look at disparities and how people see things differently, but what we have found in our national data is that actually a lot of people have the same goals in mind. No matter who you are, we actually want the same things in our community. We want safety. And so we really want to end the survey and I want to end this presentation by talking about the areas where people see are a priority for Billings. And what we found from your residents of them saying what's essential and very important in terms of the city focusing on, or the police department and the city focusing on, they want you to look at drug enforcement, school safety, the homeless population, controlling juvenile crime. And then you also see even high levels of support for the connection with the community, accessibility of cops with the communities, traffic enforcement, the solving of neighborhood problems. The nuisance code violation definitely drops down below, so not a priority as much. But you'll see a lot of these issues very important to residents. And like we said, it's your number one priority as the council. And what we find when we do the national community survey, in every community, safety is a number one issue. If it's not number one, it's number two. And the only other issue that scores up with it ever is economy. So it is really important to keep focused on safety, and understand that the difficulty with some of the decisions you're making is that everybody thinks everything's important when it comes to safety. So I think the report that Tom, the CPSM folks kind of move forward with can help you focus and understand like which of the priorities are the best and easiest to achieve in the next coming years. So here's our conclusions from the report. And it's pretty much what I just told you, is that residents feel safe in their neighborhoods and they give up Billings a high place to live. They actually, in some of the data that I didn't demonstrate, the quality of life in Billings, people really like this community. However, there is quite a bit of concern about the safety and the crime issues in the community, which again is nothing new to you all, but it is important to understand that it is significant to them that in some areas they don't feel safe and there's some issues they don't feel safe from. However, police service delivery in Billings is highly regarded, and the trust in the police department is stronger than we see in other communities in the nation. So even though you have some challenges, you also have some strengths in terms of people already feeling supportive of the work you're doing. So that is the end of my presentation, but I will stay around for questions after we see the next report.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Lest we forget, let's open it up for questions on the survey, unless there is another presentation by staff or anybody on the consulting team. Is that the end of our presentations on the survey?
Yes, Mayor, I believe that is the presentation for the survey. So Michelle, I probably should have clarified it better. We're going to do Q&A now on the survey. Then we'll ask you to stick around so that when the community weighs in or asks any questions via Zoom, then we'll get rounding out both kind of products. So very good. So we'll open up for questions from City Council. This is not the time for public comment, but Michelle, I'm just going to give you a softball, and then Councilmember Boyette raised his hand. Should we be concerned about self-selection bias in the results here? You've explained how you adjust for demographic groups. I think we understand that. The survey recipients were randomly selected to receive the survey, but they were not randomly selected as to who decided to send it in. That was only 17%. So presumably that got people who cared more positively or negatively. If those balance themselves, I guess it's a wash. But to what extent is this truly representative of the whole community when people can choose whether or not to send in the survey?
So the state of the survey research field in general, and has been for many, many years, is you'll never get 100% response rate. Even with the census, when you try to get everyone, we still don't get everyone. There are people who will choose not to respond to us. And there are folks that are always harder to reach. We call them harder to reach, but folks who won't respond. Younger folks, males, usually people of color. That's who we usually don't hear as much from. What we do in our sampling methods, besides using kind of state-of-the-art methods in terms of multi-mode contact, statistically weighting results, the other thing we do is we actually oversample the renter units to begin with from the sample, because we know those folks are less likely to talk to us. So we do that. So we do the state-of-the-art methods. That said, we can't make people participate that don't want to participate. But we do know that we get kind of we've been monitoring this over 25 years. And even though we've seen some response rates lowering, a lot of the community surveys we do stay very static if they haven't done a lot of work. And so we feel pretty confident that it may not be a perfect sampling, but I feel like we actually hear from community members who may feel more strongly about policing, but they also often tend to be homeowners who feel more just strongly about the community in general and care and feel like their voice is welcome at the table. Now, we also did the open participation survey, and I don't know if you look at those results, you will see that you actually, in terms of community issues and safety issues, you get very similar ratings. But what we found, the people who were drawn to the non-probability survey, what we call it, or open participation, tended to be more negative. So as an expert opinion, like I would trust those scientific survey results more than I would the non-probability, because we know that people who tend to come to open participation activities often tend to be negativity inspires people more than positivity. And you may know that from council meetings. When I worked in local government, people were more likely to come to a council meeting if they were upset than if they were happy. Happy people stay home and say about their own business. Unhappy people tend to complain. If you look on Yelp or any kind of customer reviews, I'm more likely to write a negative review than I'm a positive one. And I feel terrible because I do this for a living. So in terms of the representation, I feel like it's a good sampling. Is it perfect? No. And there's no way to make people talk to us that won't. So that's what I would say.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we can all agree with the balance between positive versus negative reviews. Councilmember Boyette.
Thank you, Mayor. My question kind of follows up with the mayor is, you received 17%. How does that relate to the real world? Is if you did a survey throughout the United States, would you get 17%, or are we high or low? Is that good or bad?
Our average response rates today, and DeMemo might be more of an expert on this, but I would say they fall between 15% to 25% for local government surveys. So I think you're right in the middle there. We rarely see response rates. Sometimes with older adult surveys, we might see 30, 40% if it's like about successful aging or something. But generally, as a rule of thumb, that's about right what we're finding. A lot of the surveys you see on television and polls like that, they actually don't even publish the response rates. They actually just talk to the first 400 people they can survey. And so for us, with that multi-wave method, where we give people who are less reluctant chances to respond and oversampling, I think we're doing a better job than you see most of the polls being done on your TV stations or across the state. But again, it is not perfect. We would love to see 80% response rates, but we haven't had 80 response rates since probably 1950. So that's just an unfortunate state of the survey industry. But it's actually one of the reasons why we at NRC are moving, like when we merged with Polko, it really brought us into the 21st century, being able to meet people more where they're at with the online engagement, starting to do shorter, these other types of engagements we think are going to be the future. So the whole idea that we're kind of doing these hybrid models of the traditional surveys with the newer ways, I think that's going to actually probably be the future in terms of getting more people to the table to talk to us and be involved in community. But again, we're in a phase right now where, we're getting folks to talk to us. But again, if they don't want to talk to us, they're not going to talk to us. So.
Okay, thank you very much. Other questions? Councilmember Ronning.
Thank you. So on the slide that you showed and also in the survey results, and it was the resident safety priorities, one of the things I noticed in the survey, and I even wrote a comment to Polko when I completed my survey on this, is that in the categories prior where you had the survey participants rate what they thought were issues within safety issues within Billings, those were not the same categories that we got to choose from when it came to setting the resident safety priorities. Yeah. So what I guess what I want to know is who decided what the resident safety priorities were going to be that we got to choose from, because they didn't match the actual safety issues that the citizens said they believed was a problem in our community. So it feels like we're given a kind of an odd direction to potentially to our police department, because it felt like the choices we were given were so narrowed down and already made for us. But anyway, thank you.
No, that's a very astute comment. One of the things we struggled with when we made the survey is asking people to prioritize like 35 different issues was difficult. So one of the things when I worked with the experts in community policing, they wanted that question set to be a little bit more about things that police departments don't always have to do. Like as a given, they have to solve murders. They have to work on mass shootings. They have to work on, but what they don't have to do is they don't have to provide services to the schools. They don't have to work with the community at a more intense level. And so that became more of a question, a little bit about what kinds of extra services, not to say that some of those things are not needed, but it wasn't so much asking them, should you keep solving murder? Everyone's going to say, yes, you have to, crime prevention, and that is the most important. So if you look at the list of priorities, it's a little bit more of where you could push resources to like different levels where it's not completely agreed upon within a community that should be something the police make an emphasis. So I should have actually probably prefaced it more like that, but that is totally exactly what you're saying. It's not saying that those other issues are not important. It's just the assumption is a lot of those issues, police, that's something you're doing no matter what, right? So that makes sense. But we hope people, when they use the survey results, kind of take into account like the different crime issues that even though police are responsible for all of them, if this is a bigger problem in your community, you probably need to solve it, right? So.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Other questions for Michelle? Councilmember Ewald.
Thank you, Mayor. Penny was just mentioning, I think it was personal priorities. It was the last slide that you had up. The thing I did this on my own on the internet, and the thing that I thought was wrong with it is you gave this whole list and you go, rank this from 1 to 5, I think it was, how important it is to you. Well, if you had it ranked, if there was 10 items, you would rank them 1 through 10. Then you would have number 10 is the most important and number 1 the least important. But everybody wants everything, so that's why you got those high numbers. But you can't do everything. The cops can only be in one place at one time. But I thought that was a very poorly rated page on that survey.
Let me say, one of the things we didn't do is we didn't ask for priorities because we actually think that when you do ask for priorities, that does turn out poorly, because even though people will say that's number 1, number 2, we like to actually find out how important it is to folks, but we also want to see the distance between the different items. So you can see the bottom item was at 50% versus 90%. But when people ask people to specifically prioritize, we don't know if the number between 1 and 2 is it 90% and 89%, or is it 80% and 70%? So we specifically put it on a scale where it's not 1 to 5, but it's essential, very important, and we skew it towards the positive because we know everything's going to be important. So again, it doesn't differentiate. You can't say we're going to do everything that everybody says 80% or above. But what we helps people to do is look at if drug enforcement came out number 1 and neighborhood nuisance control is the end, we know how to spend our money. When those priorities are very linked and everything's important to folks, it's not as useful. In some communities, it's more differentiated than it was in your community. But again, that's just good for, local government to understand, and the police department know if everything's a high priority. And again, we didn't ask about all the things police do. We were just talking about some of the things that police departments might decide to focus more energy on. So again, if you're looking at those competing priorities, you might be able to differentiate. But if you have 89% and 84%, that's not differentiating. So I get that. But it's really hard in all community safety questions to ask people what's important. They will always tell you everything's the most important. But asking rankings doesn't give you as much information as having folks rate it and then re-rank it afterwards. What I'm so happy is that Tom and those folks did a report that also looks more at this kind of stuff. So you can take the resident perceptions and combine that with the real data of what's happening, what's important in your community. And it's kind of in that combination where you can help set priorities. The other thing I want to say too is when we talk about these priorities and as you move forward, because you're actually making a very big effort in the in the area of community policing, you actually have the subscription to Polko. You can move forward and do some surveys where you actually ask more about priorities within given areas, within different types of things, and we can dig a lot deeper. On this survey, we were trying to do so many things at once. We wanted to give assessments. We wanted to look at public trust. We wanted to look at the crime issues that were bigger. To make that prioritization section really big would have caused us to have not as many people complete the survey. So we did have to shorten that section, but I fully support you guys moving forward, working more with residents in terms of prioritization once you have those items set that you're really considering. If you had a real set of 5 things you're thinking about, put those back out to the residents and ask them their opinion about those 5 things now. We were just trying to do it generally, just for the nation and for you, so you understand like where people's values lie in a general sense. But that's definitely not saying those are the areas you have to work on as a community. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Other questions? Any other questions for from Michelle? Councilmember Tricky.
Thank you for your work on this. I totally understand that this is basically a snapshot of the relationship between the community and the police department in terms of where we're at right now. One additional comment that I would make is that just in terms of people of color, here in Billings, the primary group, the group that we most are concerned with is actually Native Americans. And I don't know if they just kind of fell through the cracks because of the lack of sampling and response to the sampling and stuff like that, which I kind of would expect to have happened. This is not in terms, the two questions that I have are not about your survey specifically, but just knowing that we have to drill down and get additional information. I'm wondering if you can point us towards any existing surveys or sets of information. One, about the whole situation around the public defender's office and the and the quality of service that comes around there. And also, again, quality of service and experience of the thing between people who are actually not the ones who are reporting the crime, but the ones who are being accused of the crimes, and looking at the quality of experience there.
So in terms of the first question, we don't have, I'm trying to think, I don't think we have tools that look specifically at looking at other elements of the criminal justice system, although we've done at National Research Center Polka, we've done a lot of evaluations of that type of thing. But if you're interested in that, I'm happy to help write some questions for you to put out on Polka if you want to do that, because we can easily take some of the stuff we've done in other evaluations and kind of apply that. We do have the data within the survey where we ask people the type of contact. Now, if they've had contact in the last 12 months. So it's not talking about people who had experiences 5 years ago. We do have that data, and it's broken up into pretty distilled, there's a lot of categories because we needed to make it easier for folks. We could, if you need, we can actually try to break that data so that you have people who you could, if we figured out what the categories made sense, but there are people requesting help, people versus perpetrators, or however you want to break that, and look at the responses of folks depending on what side of the law they fell into. And we definitely have that data already and can do those breaks for you so you can dig a little deeper. In terms of the harder to reach populations, in every community, it's really hard usually to get people of color to talk to them. And in your community, if it's the Native American population, you have to really do a lot of outreach. And one of the things we think is really a great thing to do is if you can team with some groups in the community that are respected by folks you don't hear from. So if there's a faith-based organization or some clubs or some communities, it's really great. And you could actually take this survey and put it out to these organizations to get their feedback as well, to try to have them help you get more feedback from groups we didn't hear from. What we do know from the survey is we got in Billings, according to the census data, there's about 10% of the residents there are people of color. We got 7% back. So it actually wasn't too far off. We statistically weighted those responses from the 7% to 10%, but in some communities, they might have 20% people of color and they got 5%. So you actually did better at reaching those folks than other communities. However, at the same time, when you have a small percentage of a population in a certain group to begin with, when you do a random sample of the population and not a census, you may not have large sample sizes. But if you are concerned about a certain group within your community, I would actually go out and talk to some folks and see if you can get them to either do the surveys, and give that data back to your task force or groups of people, or you can have them actually or do some kind of focus groups. In the past, I've gone out and I'll do a focus group with folks who don't traditionally want to respond to surveys. And we host a focus group, talk to those folks for an hour and find out what their issues are and feed that information back along with the broader assessment, so that we can actually help customize a plan, to move forward. But there's ways we can do that. But again, it's always hard to get folks who have not been traditionally responding to come, they don't want to come to meetings. They don't want to do a survey. They either don't feel welcome, they're scared, or, all the different reasons, they're busy. But it is, in this day and age, kind of important to reach out if you have a large group of residents you don't hear from. Making some kind of efforts out to those groups is usually well worth your time in the long run.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Thank you. Councilmember Neese. And then Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, Mayor, because Danny asked the same question I was going to ask, but I was confused when you gave some of the answers, because as I was looking at the survey, one of the things I was looking forward to and was hearing from the non-white community, seeing how the police was, because we hear a lot of things that, we don't understand and about the survey would answer it. But we actually were, we're 15% non-white and we only have 5% respondents back. Now, interesting thing about it was, like you said, the non-whites, which include the Native Americans, the blacks, and any other non-whites, it actually did rate them anywhere from, maybe 7 to 10 points higher on the respondents. But but I'm afraid this being 10% missing the mark. How does that really impact this survey by being off by 10% of our population represented in the survey?
So I would say, and also the one thing I want to point out too, if you have a small number of people represented, the folks who are responding to you also, they may be more like, we're making the assumptions when we weight survey data that the folks we heard from are just because of the color of their skin or their gender or their age, they're similar to the people we didn't hear from. And that's not always a fair assessment, right? So, but the one thing I would say is your results in terms of being higher than the nation and lower than the nation, you weren't close. You were on your safety, you're way below the nation, and on your public trust and service provision, you were way above the nation. I think even if we change those by having more folks of color in the responses or more folks in any group, I don't think that would change what we found because your results were so strong in either direction. So again, they might change, and with all the data, we could change, 5%, 10%, but I don't think I would conclude anything different. I don't think we would have found anything different overall if we would have had a better representation of people in color. However, now those disparity ratings where we have a smaller group of people representing the larger group, that could change significantly. And again, if, say, for instance, Native Americans have a very different experience with your law enforcement than the other people of color, we're masking out that difference. And that's why I wanted to bring it up in the presentation. So that's why it would be really important if that's a group that's interesting to you and is a big part of your population, I would go out and try to get more of those folks to talk to you so that we don't make these statements that blanket and say, basically, there's no problem in this community, right? We don't know because of the small samples, we had to put a whole group of people together that may cancel each other out. So again, I think it's important that we're sensitive to it and we think about it. And I don't want to say this survey is perfect. I don't. I just want to say that overall, in terms of people feeling like they're not safe in Billings and people supporting the police, I feel pretty confident those results are correct, no matter, yeah.
Thank you. Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. I got to kind of preface my question a little bit. I really appreciate the results here. I don't think there's anything surprising to me here. These are absolutely, every one of these are categories we've been talking about for several years as being priorities. So nothing new there. One of the surprising, maybe not surprising, but happily surprising maybe, was, what the community feels about our police department and the efforts that they're making. I've heard a lot of bad, a lot of accusations and stuff like that. So it's really good to see those results. Makes me feel a lot better. The question I have is those priorities that are listed for Billings, they rate higher than the average, but are those pretty standard topics across the nation, or are they very different than many of our sister type cities?
No, I think in terms of priorities, like it varies a little bit from community to community, like if you're a suburb versus a city and all those things. What I would say, I think the reason why you're higher than the nation is, again, I think people feel very strongly about safety in your community just because your ratings of crime are high. So I feel like they said essential and very important more often than some communities because people are just rating the community, less positively in terms of safety. But I will see some communities, like if they've had a lot of suicides or like there was a school shooting in the more recent, you might see school resource officers coming up more. If you've seen, so it will depend. Or if you have a community that's super affluent with very little crime, they might care about the nuisance, things. But again, everything in community policing is almost always important to everybody. So like that's, I said, that's why I know you're all searching for your priorities, but people think that everything's important, but I think your folks were just saying it with more passion just because they really are supportive of you doing something with the police here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Michelle, just another question. Doing something with these problems often comes down to money. Missing from this survey, regrettably, is the question, are you willing to pay more? How would you prioritize dollars? if more money was spent, how should they be prioritized in types of policing between police and fire? Can you just tell us whether your organization has any experience with surveying specifically aimed at the financial issues and collecting that? And if you've got any advice for us, if we were to do that as a next step, or how that process works?
Definitely. We do a lot of work in what we call willingness to pay questions or ballot initiative prep work. And what I tell folks is, if you want to ask the questions about willingness to pay, we want you to be specific. So like you can say, do you want to pay more money for the cops? Yeah, sure. And then you take it to the ballot initiative and it might fail. So it's really important. So the ways they use our surveys, and like I said, you can use the Polko platform, is to find out if people would be supportive. Also determine the ranges they're willing to pay. Like, should it come from property tax? Should it come from sales tax? Like, how do you want to pay for the cops? What needs to be included in the ballot language, if you're doing a ballot language, or if you're just trying to raise taxes? I don't know how Montana works, but in places where the residents have to vote that approval, we actually work earlier in the cycle, not at the very end, but to find out the people who support increases for the police, why it is they want to support the police, and what would have to be in that package to make sure that it's something that's interesting to them. Then we also find out the people who don't support it, what are their biggest issues and what could we do? And then we also, again, I can identify, like, is it, a sales tax percentage? Is it a property tax valuation? But I think doing that work up front will make sure that you actually develop a package. If you're going to ask to get more funding for the police, you'll find out more about residents, what they really want, what they want to pay for, and what's compelling to them. And then also, if there are barriers, why people are opposed to it, and are there ways to help mitigate those barriers? So I would recommend highly you do some of this work, and we have examples of the type of work we've done across the country in terms of making sure residents get involved in that kind of willingness to pay equation. And in some communities, like I said, you're very supportive of the police here, which is great. But in some communities, folks just are so against taxes, it doesn't matter what you do. And so you have to kind of just navigate. And so we also do some of the questionnaires too, where it's like, not only do you want to raise taxes, but it's like, or do you need us to cut other services? So we also do the kind of surveys where actually they're asked to compare priorities. And, do we need to take away from XYZ to help fund more of ABC? And they're hard choices, I know, but we've done a lot of work on that. We've done it for the last 30 years. And we're seeing a lot of those kind of choices, not just for police, but for local governments in general, because we have so many local governments who have shortfalls from COVID. And how are they going to exist in the next year or two to get themselves out? They're having to make hard choices. But we have ways that we help the residents give some kind of voice into that decision-making process if you want to do that.
Okay, thank you very much. Councilmember Running, and then Chris Kulski.
Thank you. So I wanted to follow up with Danny's question. Because you had, Michelle, you had shared earlier that the non-scientific results that we got from the surveys that were sent out to the public, and had the public had the option to participate in that survey. So Assistant City Administrator Kevin Ifland, and he may want to comment on this, but those surveys were sent out very specifically to groups of people. Plus, there was also an option that people could participate on the city's website. So I guess clarification, and maybe Kevin can ask about or can share about this also. In regard to what you were saying about sending them out to specific groups, like for us, example, maybe not in our town, maybe some of the nonprofit organizations that work with people of color. Is your recommendation that we would give a link to that specific group, and then we would get that information back from that group, so we would know specifically how that group of people is answering the question? Okay, because my guess is that's not what we did, and Kevin can probably answer this. And then the other comment I just wanted to make was, it's interesting to me to look at when you break down the wards and how the wards responded to the survey. It very much reflects how people vote in Billings also. So I thought that was an interesting, interesting.
And there's lots of areas to dig deeper to kind of start seeing where those discrepancies, like I said, even though a majority of people are giving you very strong ratings, obviously not everybody has the same level of satisfaction. Before I can have Kevin talk, but I did want to say, before I sent out that survey link, the number one thing we talk to folks about when we're talking about trying to get those hard to reach people to the table is meet with folks who actually do know, people from that background, and ask them how they want to participate. Because they may say, and what we found this may happen with like race, ethnicity. We don't like to do surveys. We don't trust the government, and we're afraid you're going to identify us and target us later. So that might be the comment. Well, it may be that they would prefer have a focus group and a discussion and give you qualitative, and have someone from the community come talk and they give you their feedback a different way. They may have just, I'm saying, different ways, or it may be that they don't want to link because technology is a problem. They would actually have someone print out hard copy surveys and bring it to an after school program where the parents are picking up the kids. But the first thing I would do is have a discussion with the folks that you don't feel you've heard enough from and find out how they want to participate, and then use that. Don't assume that a survey link is going to solve the problems. I wish it would. And that's the easiest way to solve the problem. But again, I would talk to those folks that you're interested in hearing from and find out how they want to collaborate with you.
Okay, thank you. Let's hear from our Assistant City Minister, Kevin Iflin, and turn it to Chris, and we'll try to wrap up here. We do want to leave time for plenty of time for the CPSM discussion as well. So Kevin and Chris.
Yep. Thanks, Mayor and Council, and thanks, Michelle. Great presentation. And Councilmember Ronnie, to answer your questions, no, we didn't just look at one group. I did send it out. I think you gave me a list of 20 plus groups that we did send out. But yeah, we didn't just look at one group, get the results back, nothing of that nature. But we targeted as many people as we could out in the community and groups out in the community to take that open participation survey. And I think we did have a fairly good response rate, based on that.
Yeah, and there's definitely more you can do to dig deeper into that open participation. If you feel like that's a more fair representation of the groups you don't hear from, that's a great way to start looking to, start digging through that data a bit.
Thank you, Chris.
So the other piece I had, two comments. One, I wanted to remind the council, we did purchase, so we didn't this isn't just a one survey and done. We did do the subscription with Palco. So we have opportunities and a continued growing working relationship with them on how to communicate and get feedback from our community. So that we're going to continue that, and we're going to learn. And as I assumed going forward, we would want to be more specific as we figure out what are we going to do for 2021 about our number one issue. The second topic, and I'm sorry to go back a little bit, but I'm just worried I probably misheard it. Michelle, I thought I heard you say that from the non-white community, that's about 10% of Billings, and about you got a roughly 7% response, something to that effect. There was a single digit gap. But then when Roy Neese spoke, he described something significantly different than that. And I don't want to misrepresent either one of them, but I thought they were talking about the same thing and they were very different from each other. Can you just touch briefly again on the non-white respondents and your confidence level in that data?
Let me, I may have, Demema, can you check that for me? It may be that I have the data wrong. But even if we're going from 5%, yes, go ahead.
It's the survey that you chose or selected. It was 95% white, which means 5% non-white, and the open survey was 96% white, and that means, of course, then 4% non-white.
Okay. I'm sorry. I have notes to myself that is different than that, so I may have done that wrong. But I would just say in general, and if Demema can look it up for us.
Page 21 for the controlled survey. It shows that.
We did weight the data back to the what the census told us was the correct population. So for the random sample survey, we heard from 6% non-white and 94% white, and then the target was 8 and 92 actually. So we weighted it to 8% not white respondents. So it should be representative overall, but it is such a small segment of the population, as Michelle said. That's where it gets tricky because we're lumping in all the non-white folks together, and that is not necessarily a fair thing to do. It's a best practice in a broad study like this, but to dig deeper, to really hear from those populations, we typically have to go meet them where they are.
Okay, so
thank you. And Mayor, if I were to make one last comment, I think this is consistent with what Michelle said. Thankfully, we really got strong, right? There were strong voices of support for our police department and very strong voices that said, we have a crime problem. And this is my own speculation, but growing up in the Midwest, where some cities had bad crime ratings for decades, I bet that would look different. I think one of the reasons our community, not only is the great job of our police officers are doing and our police chief, which are strong, it was only a decade ago, 12, 15 years ago, that we had nowhere near these kind of crime statistics. So I think our community is saying to us, we see there's a problem and we really want you to do something about it. And imagine if we had a police department that did not have the community's support, how much more difficult this would be to overcome. It would be significantly more difficult for me and for you, I think, to overcome both a high crime perception and real problem and we don't trust your police department and its leadership issue. So I hope we don't squander this opportunity and wait until things are so bad that we lose half of this in order to make headway. So I know none of us are intended to do that. It's why it is our number one priority. And we've spent so much time over the past 2 years focusing on this issue. So thank you.
I have been in communities where the excellent and good ratings of police are 21%. So imagine how difficult it is for those communities to do anything in terms of crime and solutions when people don't trust and respect the police and there are crime issues. Like you're in a much better situation as the city administrator said. But again, like we're saying, strong ratings, but we're not saying everybody uniformly loves the police in Billings. And so again, just making sure that, you do the outreach that you can to talk to the groups that are interesting, but also always looking at what overall the big picture is really important. But I think you have 3,000 people at least on your panel. One of the great things about that open participation link was you got a lot of folks to sign up too that want to be involved in the local government and help with decision making. So if you decide to move forward and ask more questions about, say, priorities once you've honed them down and you're trying to decide, or you want to figure out if people are willing to pay and what types of ways you can use to fund more police services, you have those 3,000 people who are already on board ready to give you their opinions. And so that's also a strength in terms of you moving forward with this community engagement piece, is you actually have the opportunity to ask a bunch more questions and you actually have a lot of people who are interested in the topic. So I think that could be a really useful part of your planning ahead.
Thank you very much. And I assume that other council members understand this, but for anybody from the public who might be listening and understand what it means to weight these groups differently, not every group responds at the same rate. So for example, men do not respond like women do. The young do not respond like older people do. And as we've learned, non-white groups do not respond to the same level as white Caucasian groups. And so when a group is under responding relative to the other, their vote, each one of those votes might be weighted, say 110% or 120% of what the larger group would be weighted. And that brings them up to represent the population across the entire city. So any final questions for Michelle before we move on to the CPSM presentations? Don't see any. So, Chris, can you make our introduction to our next series of reports?
Actually, to keep us moving, I'm going to turn it back over to Tom. Or Tom, do you want us to go right to Wayne? Tom, I'll get to you, and we can go from there.
Okay. Thanks, Chris. I'm going to turn it over to Wayne Hiltz. He was the team leader on the police side. And Wayne, take it away.
Thank you, Tom and Chris. I understand that you can see me. I unfortunately cannot see you for some reason. It shows as a post attendee to the meeting, but I'll work through this. I was joined on the assessment team by Marilyn Diaz and John Clark, who are both on this call as well. Collectively, we have about 100 years, a little over 100 years of policing in the local law enforcement environment through the rank of police chief. In retirement, we've worked collectively for about 20 years for CPSM and have conducted about 40 studies similar to that here in Billings. And so I just wanted to give you a little background as to who we are and what our qualifications are to conduct this study. The scope or the purpose of the study really focused on two areas. One was a staffing analysis, and we looked at whether staffing was appropriate for the workload that the department experiences in Billings. And the second was to look at whether the department operates with best practices, looking at operational efficiencies. There were two phases to the study, and they were conducted parallel to one another. The first was a data analysis. We have a data analysis team back on the East Coast that collected your computer-aided dispatch call for service data. So what occurs is that as a citizen calls into the 911 center, if a decision is made to dispatch a police unit or fire or EMS, but in this case, a police unit, a call history is generated, and information from that call history was collected for the year 2019 for all calls that the police department responded to. And that data was evaluated, assessed, filtered by the data analysis team, and is a part of the report in section 9. And there's a lot of information in that report, and we encourage you in the assessment report to take a look at that separately. But that's really a focus on data, and so we imported some of that information from the data report, some of those charts and tables and figures, et cetera, into the assessment report. And then we provided an interpretation for what that meant in terms of policing for the city. And that was our responsibility as the assessment team, John, Marilyn, and I. The work is really data driven. We focus, it's important for us to look not anecdotally at the department, but look at data. And so that's why all CPSM studies are data focused. We use the computer-aided dispatch system, the department's records management system, and where those data sources are not available, we rely on systems that you use internally. And this is an issue that we'll talk about later with regard to technology, but case management data for detectives, internal affairs, your K-9 unit deployments, et cetera. Those are all internally generated, monitored, and controlled data sources that we use. This work resulted in the 210-page report, and I apologize for the length, but there was a lot of information to cover. And that report reflects our observations and findings. The focus of our work and that report really is on areas of improvement. And we mentioned in the executive summary that had we looked at the strengths of the department, the report would have been much, much longer, as would the number of recommendations. So our focus is really on things that you may want to consider, the recommendations that we offer in terms of improvements for the department. It's designed to be a tool for the city and for the police department to use as you see fit, both in terms of your fiscal ability to implement the recommendations, as well as the policies that you have as a community, and whether the recommendations fit within your policies for the council and the city. There are some significant observations that we made that I just wanted to share with you. The department is a very good department. We were very impressed with a lot of dedicated people that the department has on its staff. And it was interesting, in the Polko study, they talked about a lot of community support. And one of the things that I think generates that support is the fact that most of your officers live in or immediately around Billings. And I will share an example just of another city that we did a study on a little larger, a little more heavily staffed in the San Francisco Bay Area. A total of 3 officers in that department lived within the city limits. And when you compare that to the situation in Billings, where most of your staff is fully invested in the city, I think that lends itself to the support that you saw in the POCO study. The other thing is, and we heard this before, the department is very overtaxed with a high crime rate. We cover that on page 16 of the report table 3.1, where we reflect that it significantly exceeds both Montana and national crime rates in virtually all categories. We use data from 2019 because that's the most recently verifiable available data that comes from the FBI Uniform Crime Report. But we asked the department to provide us with the 2020 data. That data will not be available through the FBI UCR until September. And so the department provided us with 2020 data for major crimes, and it was shocking, quite frankly, to see the increase in virtually all categories of major crimes. The heavy workload demands are reflected. There's a lot of talk about the rule of 60 in our reporting on patrol. There's 2 parts to the rule of 60, and I'll cover this in a little more detail later, but there's 2 parts. The rule of 60 calls for, in part 1, that about 60% of the department's sworn staffing is assigned to patrol-related functions. And you're very close to that with the assignments of your personnel into the various divisions and functions, not all of which are direct patrol, but are patrol-related. And the second part of the rule of 60 is that not more than 60% of their available time in deployment is committed to workload generated by the community and or self-initiated work. And therein lies a pretty significant problem for the police department. They are averaging in the 66 to 72% range, and those figures are on pages 44 through 47 of the report. Again, it's a very overtaxed department based upon the workload and available staffing. In the executive summary, we touch on 3 common themes that are found throughout the report. One is facilities. There are significant issues with respect to the facilities that the department has to operate from. Police headquarters housed in the city hall structure is inadequate to house the department staff. As a result, you have patrol officers that deploy from what they call the barn, which is several miles away. Patrol supervisors, however, operate out of both facilities. Their offices are in the main police facility, but they have to attend briefings in the barn. Several of the detective functions are in satellite facilities as well, and there's simply inadequate parking at the existing facility to accommodate the staff that you have. Another part of the facility issue, and it's really not controlled by the city of Billings, but by Yellowstone County, is the absence of adequate jail facility space. There is a significant impact on the workload, as many of the people who are arrested for offenses in Billings cannot be housed due to a lack of space at the jail. And there was one example that occurred shortly before we arrived. An individual had 52 outstanding arrest warrants for violations of various crimes committed, generally nuisance type crimes, but committed in the city of Billings. 52 arrest warrants. The county would never accept him because there simply wasn't space to accept him. And so that generates both quality of life issues for your business community, your residents, and also increases the workload for officers dramatically as they continue to struggle with individuals who are just habitual offenders. As was provided to us anecdotally, in one case, they cited an individual for an offense because the county wouldn't take them, tore up the citation, threw it on the ground and said, now what are you going to do? They can't take me for this either. And so that's kind of the situation that officers find themselves in, very frustrating, difficult situation. Officers are problem solvers, and when they run into that kind of a situation, it's certainly frustrating and impacting on their morale. It also impacts, obviously, revenue in the downtown business areas as customers are uncomfortable in those areas where that population tends to frequent. The second major issue is insufficient staffing at both the line and mid-level supervisor area. And we'll talk about that throughout the report. But there are a couple of things that I want you to consider early on is that the solution is not simply putting more officers on the street. That is a common perception that all we need are more cops on the street. The problem is more significant than that. The absence of mid-level supervisors are critical to the operational effectiveness, and the shortage of those supervisors in Billings is pretty troubling. It's a significant problem that impacts the department really at all levels. The third issue with respect to staffing is there's a significant opportunity available to you to increase the use of civilians in responding to calls for service and handling other duties that are presently handled by sworn peace officers. It's both cost effective and they can develop expertise that really is more difficult for officers because they move around from assignment to assignment. So we'll talk about the police service officers and forensic specialists as civilian positions that could be added to the complement, again, at a substantially less cost than a sworn officer, and at the same time providing equal to or better levels of service in most cases. The third area is the organizational structure. And the structure, we believe, is in part established the way it is because of the absence of mid-level supervisors. One example is that you have your assistant chief of police overseeing the animal control unit. That is an alignment that should not exist in a well-staffed agency where mid-level managers, both at the sergeant and lieutenant level, are sufficient to manage the various units of the department. They are so overtaxed in most of the functions, most of the divisions, because of the absence of mid-level supervisor, that you find, again, the assistant chief overseeing animal control, your police chief, your assistant chief, your captains, your lieutenants, all respond on calls for service because of staffing issues. It just kind of perpetuates throughout the department. There are a couple of just minor cleanup areas, your criminal investigations and professional standards division, patrol. The domestic violence unit, for instance, is in professional standards. It should be transferred to detectives. Your internet crimes against children's unit is in patrol. It should be transferred to detectives. That's just an alignment issue. It's really not even a functional supervision issue, but what happens is that those positions become lost in the organization, and the detective supervisor really does not pay adequate attention to those functions because by organizational structure, they are assigned outside of his division. Again, the ICAC, or Internet Crimes Against Children investigator, is assigned to patrol, but no patrol supervisors are supervising that position. So those are just a couple of cleanup items. We offer in section 8 of the report on pages 131 through 137, a proposed organizational realignment that we think would serve the organization well. And those are decisions certainly to be made by the department and the city, but we think that that is a sound alignment for your particular department. Other notable areas that aren't section specific, you need to develop an aggressive succession plan. You have virtually all of your upper level command staff, and I'm talking about civilian supervisors and lieutenants and above, that will be retiring within the next 4 years, some inside of that 4-year window. And so you're going to need to fully prepare the mid-level supervisors and even line personnel for upward mobility that will come sooner than later. That is a critical need for the department. I talked a little bit about technology. While the CAD system, the computer-aided dispatch system, serves the organization well, there are a variety of police-specific technologies that can be used in sections like your internal affairs, your professional standards, IA Pro, and detective case management. These are all specific, they're police-specific technologies. Rather than using those technologies, use Excel spreadsheets. In detectives, for instance, there are 3 different case management programs that you use where single systems, technologies are available for that case management that are much more efficient. And because you don't have adequate resources in there, the supervisors have had to use 3 different systems in order to try to track cases. And again, in IA Pro, that is an internal system. It will track both personnel issues in terms of use of force, internal affairs complaint. It can break the information, record the information and break it down by ethnicity of the persons that are contacted, who the complainants are. There was some talk in the POLCO study again about the demographics of the city, and in that breakdown, there is no information at present that is readily available that identifies the ethnicity of all of the people that are contacted, arrested, that are not arrested, investigations or uses of force. There are technologies that easily will provide that information to you. With respect to technology, one of the things that we would recommend is that you develop a technology committee within the department that involves end users. One of the mistakes that many agencies make is that they rely on people who are technologically savvy, and that they create systems that become unusable for the end users. So we would suggest that that is a focus of that technology committee if you choose to go there. In summary, I just want to say it's a very good, solid department with dedicated personnel. We've made more than 100 recommendations. That's common in our studies. That's not a red flag for you. The recommendations were thoughtfully reasoned. Each offer value. We understand that there are budgetary constraints. We are not constrained in making our recommendations. We don't want to be constrained. We want to offer you what the needs of the department, and you can make a decision as to which of those you have to implement. But we did not want to shortcut the recommendations based upon any fiscal constraint. We did not pad numbers either. The staffing numbers that we gave to you, we believe are at a minimum what is necessary. I talked about the rule of 60 before. Not more than 60% of the officers' available staffing time should be committed to call for service. That doesn't mean the other 40%.
Wayne, I think we might have lost Wayne. We'll put him back on when he rejoins us, unless he joins us real quickly. And Chris, Chief St. John also has a presentation, I believe. Oh, I see Wayne back with us. We'll give him just a second. Wayne, if you can hear us, we lost you there briefly, but you're back. Can you hear us okay? We can see you, but can't hear you. You're on mute. If anybody has a way to unmute Wayne.
Okay.
There you
Gotcha.
There. You're with us. Thank you.
Okay. I'm not sure where I lost you. My screen went blank, and then you came back on.
You were just going into the rule of 60.
But again, in summary, it's a solid. Okay. Again, this has to do with the staffing. This has to do with the staffing recommendations. The rule of 60 is, Marilyn, can you hear me? My screen is really having problems.
Yeah, we can hear you, and that is where you left off.
The rule of 60. Okay. The rule of 60 is doesn't mean that the 40% uncommitted time is free time. That's time that officers spend looking for violations, solving neighborhood problems, and other related duties in terms of crime prevention and patrol. Unfortunately, your numbers reflect, on average, and we looked at 4 windows of time that the officers' time.
Wayne, we might have lost you again. I don't know if you can still hear us. We'll go ahead with the chief, and when Wayne rejoins us, we'll give Wayne an opportunity to finish up any of his other comments. So, Chief St. John, go ahead.
Mayor, Council, good evening. I'm going to share my screen if I may.
And while you're sharing your screen, Chief, might I suggest to Tom and Marilyn, I know Marilyn was on the ground here in Billings as well, if, as a backup, if Marilyn, I don't know if you do, Marilyn, if you know what the wrap up was going to be for Wayne, you might be able to give that to us after the chief. So looked like your screen was solid throughout. Thanks.
Yeah, Marilyn, we'll certainly give you that option if you would prefer to continue in Wayne's place. We'll ask Chief St. John to hold off for a couple minutes, but that's up to you.
I'm sorry. My suggestion was let's let Chief, you had it, Mayor. I'm sorry. Let's let the chief go. I thought if Marilyn could be prepared, if we can't get Wayne back, we'll have Marilyn or Tom kind of summarize it. Thanks. Okay,
great. Thanks. So Chief, it's back to you.
Thank you, Mayor. Is my presentation up for everybody?
I can see it, so should be.
Yep.
Very good. Well, first and foremost, I want to thank both Polcom and CPSM for those brutally candid surveys and assessments. They consummate professionals, great to talk to, and certainly know the business. So I appreciate all the work they did to help us out with this. The way I look at this, really just going to piggyback on what Wayne was saying, but providing a little bit of context and culture on top of and aside from the data. I would remind everybody, as Wayne indicated, when I first looked at this report, it was for anything that said like dismantle, get rid of, contract with the sheriff's office, hire private security, and I didn't see that. And so again, I think that the bottom line is we have a good department. They're doing a great job, and we want to build on the positive things that we're doing. And the general observations certainly capture that. Again, to reiterate the things that really are overarching our operation that we need to pay attention to would be the facilities, lack thereof, the staffing, and the organizational structure. And the things that are specific to council would be the facilities, the staffing, and additional support. What we're talking about here are really the money items. Obviously, if we need to have some discussion on whether we are going to go centralized or remain decentralized, what your staffing looks like, whether we want some additional officers or those police service. CPSM recommended 19 and a half FTEs. That's going to require some funding. And then the additional support would be obviously working with the county on the jail. We're heavily invested in mental health programs with our partners at Yellowstone Connect. And I would remind you that our body camera program is getting ready to kick off. And not only the storage problem, but the retention and the public information requests that are going to come fast and furious is going to require GINA staff to review and redact, somebody to make those copies and get them out. And then ancillary issue, CPSM recommended an alarm ordinance. That is certainly a policy body issue. We've explored that in the past, but something that is seen to help us out with freeing up some of the officers' time. Our focus, specifically, these main bullets here, I won't insult you and read them all, but you can see where we really are in line with what CPSM has recommended. Not quite to the detail. This is what we'll be working on, but hitting on all the high points. First and foremost is to improve our efficiency and effectiveness. And we've always started down the path of looking at some of the areas that were pointed out as being areas we can improve. And the one thing I will tell you is where we're looking at it is areas that don't cost any money. It's some organizational changes, some technology issues, some language, some data entry, where we can clean it up and it won't cost any additional funds. As we move forward here, here's what we've been working on since the report came to us. You can see on the operations side, this is the focus that we have, these 4 boxes. Obviously, we want to get that response time down. There are some issues there with data entry. The one thing that jumped out at me was the word alarming in this report that had to deal with our out of service time. That's something that we need to look at, whether it's data entry or making sure that our supervisors are paying attention to who's doing what on their downtime. We want to get after the targeted patrol for those crime problem issues and talk about our beat identification. And that was really basically so it's easier to pull data out to see exactly what's going on. Investigations are, again, in line with what CPSM is recommending. Let's clean up our case management, make sure we got an efficient call-out procedure, structure, and make sure that our evidence is contemporary in how we're handling things. Professional standards, support services, and training. All these things are underway. CPSM left before 2020 was done. A lot of these things have been were in the process and have been taken care of. Some different policies specifically regarding use of force. Those things have been added. So those are underway as we speak. And as you open the meeting, Mayor, I will reiterate as well, our goals remain the same, and that is to reduce the violent crime, take care of those downtown issues, whether they're real or perceived, and traffic enforcement. And we know from experience that our proactive and targeted enforcement has been effective. And we think that
what CPSM recommends is going to augment our operations side to help us be even better. To that end, and I'll just, this is kind of off script, if I may, Mayor. I know that there was some questions on what we've been doing with the $300,000 of CARES money since January 1. And I will just leave this up here for you to look at. And then I will go on mute because I think Wayne or Marilyn are back for other questions. But since that time, we have been very busy with targeted patrol on a myriad of issues. And here is your return of investment through the end of February. And estimated 21,000 expended out of that. And we're using some additional money for support services. We got a bunch of reports that need to get entered. And the shop was given some overtime money to help get our cars ready to go for the body camera. Again, not related to this report, but I know it's on your mind, what we're doing with your money. Mayor, end of report, unless you have any questions for me.
Thank you very much, Chief. In this chart that we have in front of us, is there any way to tell us what that would have looked like but for those dollars?
Yeah, I wouldn't be presenting a chart.
Okay, so more than would have been otherwise. So thank you very much.
Yes, absolutely.
Chief, to your credit, I did ask the city administrator what your general response was to this 200-page report with over 100 specific recommendations. And he said, to your credit, you said you would start addressing these problems, that you've already started that, and you did not ask them to change any part of the report, which I thought was indicative and very important. So thank you in that way. Okay. We'll go back to the council in just a minute for questions of our presenters, but I don't know whether Wayne rejoined us. If not, we'll ask Marilyn if she has any concluding words. Wayne, we've observed that sometimes the audio will do better if you turn off your video because there's only so much bandwidth out there. So if you are having any problems, you might try that. Wayne, I see you.
I am back.
Can we hear you? Okay, and we can hear you.
Thank you.
And Wayne, we can see you. Yeah, you're moving. So.
Yeah. I'm not sure where I left off. I think
you left off talking about the rule of 60, and you were going to make sort of a final point there, I believe.
Well, again, the rule of 60, and I talked about the two parts. I hope that information was relayed before I got cut off. But the second part of the rule of 60 is that not more than 60% of the officer's time is committed to call for service and self-initiated activities, such as traffic stops, arrests, etc. That the additional time, and it's not a window of 40%, it's buckets of time that is spent problem solving, looking for traffic violations, etc. It's constructive time that they need to do that. Unfortunately, your numbers are significantly higher than 60%. They range between 66 and 72% on average and peak at one point at about 90%. And at that point, officers become reactive and not proactive any longer. They just kind of sit and wait for the next call. And that may have something to do with the extent of the out of service time that we talked about in the report and that the chief eloquently spoke of just a moment ago. Finally, I would just say that many of these staffing recommendations are linked to the organizational structure changes that really are needed. I think the organizational structure is set up the way it is today in part because of the absence of adequate staffing. And so the department just tried to find places to put units, and that's how, for instance, the animal control unit got assigned to the assistant chief, because everybody else was just overtaxed to accept that as an area of responsibility. And the proposed reorganization really is tied to the additional staffing. Without that staffing, the proposed organization won't be effective. So with that, I will turn it back to you and the council for questions.
Okay, thank you. We will open it up, and I don't know whether John or Marilyn had any other comments, but you may want to jump in response to some of our council questions. Council, we've got at least 15 minutes before we normally take a break, so fire away. Councilmember Purington.
Thank you. I have one question for the chief and one for Wayne. On page 66, in the middle of the page, there was something about the substantial workload, and it refers to failure to meet federal and state mandates. Is Billings anywhere near that or lacking in those mandates that they would be up for sanctions?
I'm not aware of any sanctions that we're facing for lack of anything. I'm not quite sure what you're referring to.
Well, in the center, it just says that failure to meet federal and state mandates may result in sanctions against the city, to include loss of access to critical databases and potential civil liability. So I don't know what those parameters are. I don't know if Wayne can address those too.
Councilmember, are you referring to the Public Records Act section on page 60, or I'm sorry, page 66, you said?
I'm on page 66, yes.
Yeah, the thing for us, council member, is, we have strict rules and regulations on who can access our systems, who can make queries, the type of information that we can request. And if we run afoul of those rules, and we do get audited, matter of fact, they're coming to audit us in a week or so. We do get sanction letters. We have to correct our deficiencies, prove to them that we have fixed things. We've not been threatened with any fines, but we potentially, if we really get bad, they can cut our access off to all of the criminal history that we have. We really need both statewide and nationally. I think that's what you're referring to. So, yeah, those are the things that we're very mindful of on our support services side.
Thank you.
And I'm sorry, I just found that the page that you're talking about, John Clark actually did that work, but I've worked with record sections in the past on these assessments. The other issue is relative to public records requests. They're time bounded, and so it's essential that adequate staffing exists in the record section to respond to those requests, and that's what the reference is to. I'm not aware that there's any sanction that has been levied against the department, and the chief indicated that there is not. We're simply pointing out that the staffing in the record section is critically important because many of the duties that they perform are time bounded.
Thank you.
That's correct. And what Wayne's saying, that the support in the support services, the staffing is necessary to meet some of those needs, and there's a whole list of tasks they have, but some of those can be consequences of not having appropriate staffing.
Thank you. So follow up, Mr. Mayor.
Please.
So Chief, one of the things I noticed, it's on page 104, it's listing all of the different professional training that the officers go through. And it lists like the FBI National Academy, Police Executive Research Forums, Naval Academy. Do any of your officers not go through Homeland Security training?
Yeah, they go to Homeland Security training as it's offered up. Probably the most prevalent Homeland Security interaction will be with our bomb squad. A lot of these trainings here are really high-level management So FBI National Academy, you have to be a captain or higher to go. Waiting list because we are a two-state area that we draw from. So Idaho is the other one, and we'll go every other year. So I've had somebody on the list for a couple of years to go. The regular officers training, I mean, that's state of Montana, put stuff on, whatever we can bring in. But what's listed here is very high level administrative stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Shaw.
Thank you. Wayne, this is a question for you. So seeing in this report a number of recommendations for different public service officers, I believe is what they're called. That's the civilian component to the police force. Is that right? My question for you is just so that I can situate that in this survey. Is the recommendation to go down that road instead of hiring more police officers because it's cheaper, because it's easier to hire people? Is that better for the departments, or kind of what's the thought process behind that recommendation versus saying, for instance, expand the police department? Can you help me understand that?
Sure. And they're referred to in some agencies as community service officers and others police service officers. It's just a preference of the term. But they perform duties, and the answer to your question is all of the above. You are right on all of the above. So they perform duties that officers perform today. For instance, they can go out and take a cold burglary report, or they can go out and write a traffic collision report, typically not an injury collision if it's serious injuries, but they can perform duties that officers perform. They're just as proficient in performing them. They are cheaper, not only in terms of salary, but in terms of pension benefits, and they are not constrained by the rule of 60. They can work at 90%, 95%. So it's actually more than a one-on-one trade for an officer. And so when we factored in the staffing recommendations, we considered that those positions, those civilian positions, provide a better bang for the buck without any compromise in service to the city.
Thank you. Councilmember Neese. Councilmember Neese, I apologize if we're going to turn over to Chief St. John in case you want to comment back to Councilmember Neese.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And I just wanted to mention to Mayor and Council that this has gone full circle. When I started at the police department a unmentionable number of years ago, we had civilians who investigated accidents, handled the smaller cases. We had civilians that oversaw the animal shelter and animal control at the time. So we've come full circle on the recommendations. We've been there and seen those things before.
Thank you. Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. Wayne, just a quick question for you about a comment you made when you first started. You said you apologized for the 210-page report. Sorry, so lengthy. So are your reports normally not this long then? I kind of got that idea that maybe we had an unusually long report.
Well, some are longer, many are shorter. The larger agency is we did the Tucson Police Department, and that was about a 300-page report. But many of the reports are shorter. You have a very complex police department that provides a wide range of services, and that's why this report is longer. We're the largest city in the state of Montana. The task forces that are involved in Billings are the numbers are unusual, not to a city of size or complexity, but usual as compared to most of the studies that we perform.
Okay, thank you. Mayor, another question, if you don't mind.
Sure, go ahead.
And this goes to maybe either Chris or Chief, I don't know. You mentioned about having prior civilians working in here. my question for you is this: does a union prevent any of us taking away some of the work of what the police officer were hired to be doing? Is there conflict in there that would be a problem we'd have to be considered?
I'm going to take the liberty of speaking for the union, and I would say no. The things that these police service officers would be doing are really, low priority, time consuming, and a lot of times the officers, because we're shorthanded, are getting pulled off of them, and they don't have an adequate time to provide service to that particular victim or complainant. I would just say, obviously, I have to talk with Chris and Kevin on that. By default, I think they would be Teamsters if they're going to be a union. It would not conflict at all with the police officers. They wouldn't be supplanting. There'd be plenty of work for the regular officers as well.
Okay, thank you.
The only piece I would add to it, and the chief nailed it, is it is accurate. We will need to work through some contract issues, but we've got a really excellent relationship with the police officers bargaining unit. So I do expect there to be things to work through, but are very optimistic that as candidly, well, and we've proven it, right? A year ago, we went to the public. We got strong support for resources for the police department. We're not done. And I think they are watching us and we are watching them as to how we work together as a bargaining unit and as a city to lower crime in our community. So I think that's the approach I have. I think that's the approach they will have, and we can work through any issues. But bottom line is, we don't have language in the contract that prohibits us from having this dialogue and these discussions, and some level of optimism, as the chief said, that we can work together going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Ronning.
Thank you. I have two questions for Wayne and then a question for Chief St. John. So Wayne, on page 100 of the report, on the fourth paragraph, it reads, CPSM recommends that a use of force review committee made up of the administrative sergeant, professional standards lieutenant, and a subject matter expert on the nature of use of force used be created and tasked with the analysis of use of force incidents. So the two questions on that specifically are, how are you defining a subject matter expert on the use of force used? What does that mean? And who is that individual? And then the second question is, and then in the report, not including the subject matter expert, CPSM does not include citizen members or law enforcement professionals outside of the Billings Police Department to be on the use of force review committee. Why is that?
Okay, well, the purpose of the use of force review and location that we recommend it to be is in the professional standards unit. And the purpose is to evaluate that use of force and determine whether it's in compliance with department policies. If there's a policy violation, that will escalate that particular use of force into an internal affairs complaint. So the
Wayne,
Is there someone else that's able to answer that? Yeah, I can answer that.
Okay, John, go ahead.
Wayne froze, but generally this use of force committee is an internal review for training purposes within the department. It involves line staff, ranking staff to evaluate the uses of force for training purposes. There's also a review process involves the chief and the discipline and some executives that review use of force incidents that may or may not result in discipline that have come to their level, and there are review within that. Generally, and I don't believe Billings has one, but generally outside experts, SME experts, whether civilian or sworn, are used in citizen review committees that some cities or counties have. But that's not, I don't believe, the case in Billings. But this particular discussion is relative to internal review of force within Billings for training purposes generally.
And John, can you answer the question about how you define the subject matter expert in this particular area?
Well, there's no particular standard. It can be established through court. If you testify in court as a force expert. Generally, it's regarding experience and training within a particular field. It could be general law enforcement. It could be as a force instructor. That types of things will qualify as a subject matter expert.
Okay, thank you. And then my follow-up question for Chief St. John. So, Chief, I noticed that throughout the report, and incidentally, I forgot to say to the CPSM folks, really outstanding report. Thank you so much. This was filled with really fantastic information. So, Chief St. John, throughout the report, a theme that I at least felt as though I was receiving was really focused on data collection and reporting. It felt as though that was a recurring theme, that there needs to be improvement in data collection. And so one of the things that caught me off guard in your presentation and your slides, because I guess from my perspective as a council member, data collection in government is profoundly important, I think, especially in policing. So in your slides, in one of the first slides that you showed, it showed 3 different categories that you felt were very important that came out of this report. I was actually surprised not to see data collection in that first slide, but relegated to a little bit less of a priority. But maybe I interpreted that incorrectly. Could you comment a little bit on that? Thank you.
Yeah, certainly, Council Member. Those were in no particular order. I will also say that the number one thing we looked at in operations was reducing our response time. And we found just on one meeting with our 911 center that we had a data entry issue that was skewing the numbers. And so these are things that we can easily fix when we identify, what's causing problems on our data entry or our data output. I don't think that we fully understand the system that we have and fully utilize it. Some of the programs that the CPSM is recommending, we've looked at. Every captain that has been in the IA position, I've asked them if they wanted me to get the IA Pro, and they were happy with what they have. Matter of fact, Mr. Upton's the one that constructed the system that we use. Lexipol is used by the state of Montana, but there's a cost for that. And so there's weights and balances on things that we need to look at. But the data is something that we need to make sure we have accurate input and accurate output. So when CPSM comes back in, we can produce a better look at what we're actually doing.
And I can comment on part of that is that the part of it was on the unit identifiers in our data for patrol information and tweaking that information, make it easier to collect and evaluate. It's not that the department didn't have data collection processes, but we provided information on what is more best practice, more technology advanced types, will provide a better management reports and efficiencies for the department to evaluate their processes instead of some that they use today, make that a little bit more difficult, and this can enhance that. But again, it weighs on staffing and those kind of things too. That can be an impact for those kind of processes to come in play. So it's a balance the chief has to figure out.
Thank you.
Thank you. I wonder if I can ask the CPS team, and I see Wayne's name up, or John or Marilyn, whoever you think most appropriate. If you can comment on whether your group made any conclusions about the current demographic diversity of our force. You did make recommendations about hiring practices. I think are very useful. The report recognizes the need to have a police force that's generally representative of the community. Much of that can be used, but we often have difficulty hiring, for example, Native officers, even though a significant part of our community is Native. And I do not recall seeing an actual discussion of that breakdown or how we might rank relative to other comparable cities. So it's not a very specific question, but can you comment generally on that issue? I doubt we're the only country or the only city in the country that cares about that.
Correct, but I think in our conclusions, we identify that is the department in the city comfortable with their demographics of their department relative to their city. Your city has a particular demographic, and your department currently runs very similar to that. There's no standard for it, but again, it's the community and department expectation that really would drive that.
Okay, and did you draw any conclusions about where we are relative to other communities or even our own demographic?
Well, I think that your current department staffing is pretty reflective of your city demographic.
Okay, thank you.
I think it's probably weighed in. I know that you have some issue in your, or not issue.
And I see Marilyn's finger up. Marilyn, did you want to comment?
Just a comment that you roughly have 10% of your sworn staff as female. So while there isn't a hard and fast number or percentage of female to male in a police department, it might be a target area to work on as far as recruiting more women for the department as sworn officers.
Okay, to increase that number. Thank you. Tom has his hand up, then we'll look to Councilmember Brown.
One of the things that one of the departments that we've worked with fairly extensively, and this is a topic and an issue across the country. It's not unique to Billings. It's not unique to any one department. But Washington, D.C. has probably had one of the most aggressive recruiting efforts that they've made to try and diversify their workforce. I think they've reached about a 70% level of persons of color, which is pretty high. How they did it was to go into the high schools, begin recruiting when they're students, have the kids riding along. They may be the ones writing the reports as non-criminal violations. They then send them to the academy and bring them back as officers. They found two things. One, those people tended to stay with the department because there was a tie to the community that they didn't want to leave. The second was they were able to diversify and build up those areas that they were selectively recruiting. They probably had one of the most successful efforts. We did a study in Fayetteville. The mayor there set a target of diversity, and they've made inroads in the police. The fire, I think the last numbers I saw, they'd reached about a 4% diversity. Their goal was about a 24%. And so it's a challenge across the country. It's probably going to become more challenging, and I think the chief will tell you this, getting applicants at all in the police department right now. We're seeing, no matter where we go in the country, chiefs are struggling, cities are struggling, HR departments to even get applications. We're in one California city, they had 32 openings. And I think they had 4 applications for those 32. So it's a very common thing that we're seeing. And it's a challenge, especially when you have a department that's looking at a number of retirements. That's going to be a factor that I'm sure the chief will be losing some sleep at nights, depending on where that all goes.
Good, thank you, very helpful. Councilmember Brown?
Thank you, Mayor. Just a kind of a quick question. We do a lot of these types of audits and you always, not these types of audits, that was a stupid thing to say. We do a lot of audits. But we always have, okay, here's what we would recommend to be in the top 10%, realizing you're not going to be able to do that. So there's the pie in the sky, and then there's the reality. I'm assuming this is pie in the sky recommendations. If we did everything on this list, wow, what an amazing department we would have and all of that. But reality wise, what would you truly expect the city of Billings to accomplish of this? 70%, 60%, all of it? As auditors, I'm just asking you, this is pie in the sky, I'm assuming, correct?
I would say that in our document that we write there, that it says that we understand that some of these may not be attainable. They may take years. As the chief mentioned, he's done some things since we left in the 2 months he's been able to address very quickly, but there's other things that are more prolonged. There's money involved and those kind of things. So I think we don't try to identify which ones you can or can't do, because sometimes there's collective bargaining, there's budgets and so on. Tom's been at this a little longer than I have, and a little broader view of all the jobs we've done. He may want to comment on that further.
Well, I'd expect Chris Koklowski to probably have everything done, within a short period of time. But no, all kidding aside, we try and identify any shortcomings we reach, and then it really becomes a policy decision on the part of the city council. We've had some city councils that have said, you know what, we don't want to see anything change. We aren't going to make those changes. We don't want to tackle those issues. And that's okay. That is the council's job. I was a city manager for 26 years, and I had a lot of great ideas, and some came to fruition and some didn't. But my goal or my job was to present everything to the city council so that where hopefully every blemish, every weakness is in your organization. There are some things that will take time. A building is not something you do overnight. That is a long-term project, but it also has to start someplace, and that's usually with the city council because it's capital outlay. And so that could take 2, 3, 4, 10 years. We've worked in some cities that have no land, that they just don't have any place they can put a facility. All of those things enter into it, and we recognize that. That's why we don't usually say, well, this is absolutely the biggest thing that you need to do. All of these things combined make it a top performing organization. We really present that to you, and we'll continue to work with your organization, with Chris, with the chief, to see where we might be able to help. For instance, pointing to departments that have done things. The thing I always tell city councils, don't recreate everything new when there's a lot out there that you can steal from other people. As I always think, as a city manager, when I would go to conferences and events, I'd come back and I'd present things to my council, and they'd say, "Where the heck did you get that?" I'd always take credit for it, of course, but the thing is a lot of cities have reached the same problems that you have, and it's that connection that hopefully we can bring and assist your team going forward. That these aren't insurmountable, that they are doable, and obviously your chief and the staff have already saw fit to begin implementation. That is a great sign. That is an excellent sign.
Thank you. Let me ask the obvious question, which I do not expect to get a great answer to, frankly, but I think it would be remiss if we did not at least ask it. Of the 100 and some recommendations, if our goal is to achieve a reduction in crime at the most rapid pace possible, and if we were to put aside fiscal constraints, of those 100 and some recommendations, are there, fill in the number, 3, 4, 5, or 6 that clearly rise to the top in producing that result? We know they are all important. They could all improve the efficiency, which all have the effect of at least indirectly reducing crime. That would be the goal. But are there some that are likely to have a more direct cause and effect relationship to a reduction in crime than others? And if so, what are those? That question for all members of the CPS team.
I would offer two things up. One is you have a highly effective street crimes unit, which in its first year was remarkably successful in making a series of arrests, cleaning up car thefts and thefts related to drugs. They are a terrific resource, and I believe they just got us another officer position, or are about to get another officer position. That's a great team. And to leave them unencumbered with collateral duties will just, I think, help the crime rate. The second thing is reducing that 60% excess level in the rule of 60 for the patrol officers. That will leave them free to initiate more proactivity, to make more arrests, to stop people involved in criminal activity. I think that's those two things I would identify as the most helpful toward reducing crime. John, do you have a thought?
No, I think you hit that particular one, Marilyn, with reducing that, but that's going to be some staffing issues. I think some of the organizational structure that with the supervision that will address some of their out of service time, which will help lower that rule of 60 number. But as the chief said earlier, he's working on trying to determine whether that's a supervision issue or a data issue. I think one of the issues that we heard was relayed to me because I wasn't able to make it to Billings for the site visit, but your jail issue of you've got a lot of issues that you can't arrest people because you have nowhere to put them. And so that I think that overall jail issue and what you do with the in custodies is probably something that will not only increase the motivation of your officers, but provide that increased safety factor that your citizens may feel by being able to address that and have more people in custody or other alternatives to custody that you may be able to come up with in your community.
Excellent.
I think I know I talked to Wayne quite a bit on this, and then I was out on the the fire EMS project, and the jail I would say is one of the most critical aspects of success moving forward. The problem is when you send officers on the street, there has to be some concern on the part of criminals that they're going to go to jail or they're going to be incarcerated. Or if you're going to get them into a treatment program, if they don't complete the treatment program, the penalty is they may spend time in jail. And so there's an incentive to those people doing things. But when you pick up people with 35, 50, 70 warrants for failing to appear on charges, in some cases, your officers are getting back to the station and that person is already on the street. That the public sees that and thinks, we had that exact case in my neighborhood. I can tell you when COVID first hit, we had a woman who was obviously having some mental issues at the time. They didn't want to take her to jail because they were mental issues. And as a result, she was going around and she became more and more violent. She pretty soon had 20 some charges against her. But the public feeling was that the police weren't doing their job, that there was a failure. The problem was they just didn't have a place to take her. The COVID had shut the jail down. Mental health wouldn't take her because she hadn't been violent. And it becomes kind of everybody's pointing the finger. And that makes it very unsuccessful, as well as it's a frustrating point for your officers. When you're picking the same person up 3, 4, 5 times a day, that gets pretty tiring. And that really wears on everybody. So I think that if there was one piece that I think is a significant challenge, it's the jail, and even more significant is because it's not under your control. It's the county's challenge.
Speaking of tiring, it's 7:49, a little bit beyond our normal break time. Council, what I propose is we take our break now. We'll come back no later than 8 o'clock, and we'll wrap up with some other questions. I saw Councilmember Neese and Councilmember Tricky both have their hands up. Maybe other council members have some final questions. and then we'll open up for public comment. We don't want to keep the public waiting much longer than they already have. So if that works for you, and even if it doesn't, frankly, we'll see you at. Well, let's see if we can get back. If we're all back together before 8 o'clock, we'll begin before 8 o'clock. Thank you.
turn my video off.
Help yourself. Make yourself comfortable. I think we
at home is what
our council members back. So we will go ahead and recommence. Welcome back, everyone. We left off with the council questions of our CPSM team. I don't think we were quite done. Councilmember Neese and Shrieky, if I remember right, had their hands up. So Councilmember Neese, would you like to begin us? And shortly after, we hopefully we'll wrap up with questions soon, and we'll open up for public comment. For members of the public, that phone number, which you should write down, don't call it yet, we'll give you a warning, is 237-6196. Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. I think the whole idea by the way, I want to say that this study was really good. I agree with Penny and everyone who's said that. I think that it was a very stark report to kind of open up your eyes to where it was done. So it was, and I'm glad the chief accepted it as it is and started implementing it. So that's kind of where my question is going. But first of all, I wanted to ask, I mean, if this is implemented, is this a guarantee it's going to reduce crime? I mean, can anyone say this is going to do it? Is this the solution to end all crime? Well, not end it, but significantly reduce it to where we can get our survey number, these respondents up, where we can actually be above national average. Put it that way.
You know, if I could take the first stab at that, I think we all know that nobody can make that guarantee. I would love to make that guarantee, but we all know we can't. I do believe, and this is where maybe Tom and others help. It is my expectation. I don't see this as pie in the sky. I didn't get a chance to call my partner in crime there, Kevin, and ask him how rosy my glasses are when I say I expect us to implement the overwhelming majority of what is in this report. And the great news is I got a city council who says you need to solve the facility problem, and we got resources to do it. We are not afraid to go to the community and ask for additional resources, especially if we can prove our proficiency and efficiency of what we're doing with the resources we have. So I'll let them go. I was looking back at some other numbers from former surveys back to the POCO. I've worked in some towns that have 92% safety feel in their neighborhood and 97% downtown. These numbers are not, it is perfectly attainable. You can go back to the 2009 National Citizen Survey in Billings, Montana, and the scores were noticeably better than they are today, and the crime rates were way lower. So I believe we can make a difference, but Tom, can you, how would you answer that as a CPSM?
Yeah, one of the challenges cities are facing, and it's these things here, phones and social media. I was explaining to Chris, we did a study in a southern city. It was actually in North Carolina, and they had a very brutal rape occur in their downtown area. And the public perception is that downtown was the worst place you could possibly be in the entire county, probably in the entire state. And when you ran their crime numbers, that was the only major crime they had downtown. But it was that perception now of the public is that was very unsafe. Conversely, at the exact same time, we were doing a study in Nebraska, and it was a community that when we actually talked to the public, they thought it was an extremely safe community, no crime whatsoever. And when you got into the numbers and looked at the data, their violent crime numbers were higher than New York City in the worst period of time. They had an extremely high number of murders, but it was confined to a minority group that was actually immigrants and an immigrant population. And so the public disregarded it. As I explained to Chris, perception is very hard to change. that it's not always based on numbers. It's based on feeling. It's based on social media. And so, not only with the recommendations we made, but I think as the city goes forward, marketing these changes, and this is a classic example, having the public participate in this type of a discussion, as well as ongoing surveys, begins to build that confidence that things are being done, that you're aware of the problem. Too often the public thinks, and I hear this a lot when we go around the country, is that, well, nobody knows what's really going on down here. I've got the feeling, having been in Billings now and talking to you folks, Chris more than once, the chief, different people, that's not the case, that you care, that you're aware of it, and that you're sincere into saying, we're going to make a change. And I think all that bodes well for seeing those numbers come up. The biggest challenge, like I said, is making sure you can get the people off the street. It's great to have the law. It's great to have laws, but if you can't ever do anything and enforce those, it really defeats the whole purpose. You can put a cop on every corner. If they can't arrest, if they can't get the criminal off the street, it really is self-defeating. And so that's what, again, where I see a big pinch point is the jail and incarceration. But we also met with a lot of your task force. We met with the substance abuse people, and they have a sincere interest in seeing how they can begin to remove these people, not through jail, but through programs, and by curing them or taking care of the problem once and for all. And so I think you have a lot of good things coming together that I don't think it's insurmountable. I think with the recommendations we made, it addresses the policing aspect, the societal parts, I think, are coming together. You have a lot of people in the community wanting to take this on.
Mayor, a quick follow-up on another question to actually the chief and maybe Chris. There's 102 recommendations. I think the chief said he's already done some of those. And so there's going to actually less that needs to be done. Chris, you want to do all of them. Of course, the jail, that's going to be a tough one. I don't know how we would address that. There's a couple issues on here on the 911 center that I don't know how much the chief is involved in that, because that's a fire department issue, but it seems to be causing problems with the police reporting in that. What specifically can we as a council, which ones do we focus on? Where does the city, what does the chief want us to focus on? I'm sure it's going to be personnel, and things like that. So where can we move the needle some that maybe we don't, without having to go out and raise a $5 million mill levy right away to get this thing moving? Because policy wise, some of this stuff is internal policies. We don't address it, right? This is going to be a lot of internal stuff. So what numbers should we focus on?
Chief St. John, are you with us? And if so, can you tell us what you'd like the council's marching orders to be to get the biggest bang for the buck in the short term?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think it was highlighted in CPSM's presentation and my early slides. Those three overarching issues have council written all over them. That would be facility, staffing, and support on some of those ancillary issues. To enact everything that Chris wants to, we're going to need some staffing then to put those programs in place. So whether that is officers or whether that is civilians, those are increased FTEs, and those are decisions that only you make. So those are the things that I would need you to consider. The balance of the 102 are really operational issues that we can work through, some very quickly, certainly at little or no cost, and others may take a little bit of time. But I think the big thing for council to consider, again, is the facilities department to look like. Do you want us to be decentralized, and then as the city grows, you want us to pull together into one area? And then, of course, the additional FTEs that we need per recommendations. That's what I need you to focus on.
And if I could add, Mayor and Council, my goal tonight truly was to to deliberately stay away from, this is how much money we need, this is the implementation. Because we've got these experts with us on the report, I really wanted to focus on you understanding, buying in, candidly, in the quality of the information you've got as the chief and I work to implement it, and that the finance director and I and the chief will need to come back to you in the near term and be very specific about, okay, how can we implement the staffing recommendations and what kind of a timeline, the facility recommendations, and really the policy end of it. But I think you guys, we all can see what the overarching policy components are. But that's the intent, is to come back, and you'll be seeing the fire side of this here probably in the next 30 days. We're reviewing that draft. We'll do the same thing, and we'll need to bring them both to you as to how we're going to implement as part of the 2022 budget proposal. And even before then, as to what to do as to how to fund. So hope that's helpful.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Trickey and then Councilmember Purington.
As many have said, very excellent report. I think you got down to the very bare bones of what we really need to focus on, and I really do appreciate that. I think there were a couple of things that I would have liked to have seen discussed in here that are probably a little bit more future looking. You did, point out the social work thing and the fact that we're not like collecting data on that. I was kind of wondering, what are some of the best practices that are happening around the country around that issue? Same thing with body cameras. That's a huge amount of data that is being collected, and there is a huge amount of opportunity there for not just for checking to see whether our training is actually working, but also just in terms of management and how language is being used and stuff like that. So I guess just putting on your looking into the future kind of classes. What are some things that we should be thinking about as we implement what we have to implement, but what we need to be looking at in terms of the problems that are coming down the road at us, and how to solve some of those.
Councilmember Trickey, did you want to focus that question to or address that to somebody in particular or a team in particular? The CPSM team. I'm just wondering, what kind of best practices are they seeing right now about how body cam transcripts are being used, how to integrate interns and volunteers into the system. Are other places, dealing with the social work issue?
I'm sorry, this is Wayne Hiltz again.
Sure.
Can you hear me?
We can. Wayne, go ahead.
Okay, I'm sorry for all the interruptions. I switched devices and I'm off the internet now, so
we can hear you great.
Thank you. Well, it's two questions. So let me take the first one. When you talk about the social work issue or the interaction, many agencies are just beginning the process, although some have been involved in it for decades, of incorporating civilian licensed clinical social workers or a similar type position into their patrol workforce. And to a degree, Billings does that through the Downtown Billings Alliance. There is a counselor that is embedded with the two officers that work on that assignment, and that counselor is a resource for the officers and vice versa in identifying people who could be drawn into the many services that are available in Billings. To take that a step further, there are agencies, there are several agencies in Southern California that are, again, embedding licensed clinical social workers into programs. One is called HOPE, Homeless Outreach and Psychological Evaluation. And an officer and a licensed clinical social worker work full-time together with that population. And as you know, it's a very service-resistant population. And so it takes a long time to build up relationships. They're not a trusting group of individuals that we work with. And so that relationship is very important. But on the backside, and especially relative to mental health issues, is the absence that most communities, and I understand that's the case in Billings as well, of bed space for people that are severely mentally disabled. And in talking with Chief St. John, he had indicated that not just in Billings, but throughout Montana, and that's actually throughout the country, there are very limited spaces available to involuntarily commit sometimes that population. Mm-hmm. So there is a relationship that's developing between the mental health community and police departments across the country, again, where they work in partnership in a patrol car. And to a degree, you do that again through the Downtown Billings Alliance, but that is trending in law enforcement and mental health communities. And cases in Los Angeles, I know, and I have personal experience for the agency that I worked with, the LA County Health Department provided without cost to the city 3 licensed clinical social workers to work with 3 different patrol officers, and we had coverage 7 days a week. Not 24 hours a day, but there was coverage 7 days a week for that partnership. And it was strictly street outreach. They would also respond to calls for service that were identified as mental health or transient population related calls for service, and take that workload off of the basic patrol force. I don't know if that fully answers the question you have about kind of where the trends are in policing today on that.
I was going to, Wayne, I'll jump in.
You wanted to finish up, then we'll go to Councilmember Purington. Tom?
Yeah, we've worked with about 5 different agencies. One was the Dallas-Fort Worth area that have done some similar things to what Wayne describes. There's also one in Colorado. I can send these to Chris. I'll look them up. But and then there's one in Oregon that's pretty popular. They, as the mayor pointed out, they all have come up with these cute acronyms that define their roles. And I'm drawing a blank right now as I'm trying to remember and keep them straight. But there have been some very successful ones that have started up. And we talked to some of your local communities. The thing that a lot of departments and cities that we've worked in say that they don't have the funds to do this. Right now, it takes about $62,000 a year to incarcerate somebody. So every time you're sending somebody to prison, you're spending about $62,000 a year on them. So if we can keep them and get them into treatment in the community, it's usually far cheaper than sending them into a jail or prison setting. And they become a valuable member of society rather than something that's just, going, hand off to hand off to hand off.
Thank you very much. Colorado, Denver programs called the STARS program. National Public Radio did a great story on that about a week, 10 days ago. Councilmember Purington and Councilmember Ronnie.
Thank you.
So, and Councilmember Boyette, did you have your hand up? No. Okay. Purington and Ronnie, thank you.
Thank you. So just one of the questions that I have, I guess I was referring to page 38, but it's talking about staffing decisions for patrol. And so I don't think that there was conversation within the report that different police officers, whether it was in administration or I assume patrols as well, that they were interviewed, but they were never surveyed to the point of getting any sort of statistical information. And I was wondering, because of the lack of jail space, the lack of being able to incarcerate various individuals, And then, like you made the comment, Tom, I think, before the officer gets back out on the street, they're on the street as well. So I would assume that affects police officers, patrol officers, morale. Was this included at all in your reporting? I did not see it, and I don't know if that's just not part of what you do because it's data analysis. But did you see any of that?
The answer to that is yes, we did see some of that. And one of the elements of our work on site is focus groups with line personnel and first line supervisors. So we met with approximately 15 patrol officers and civilian staff in the department, and then later with about 6 or 7 first line supervisors. And there commonly we heard about the frustration of not being able to adequately address a problem. And I mentioned earlier that police officers are problem solvers, and they get very frustrated. And in some cases, I suspect it leads to, on occasion, a use of force that maybe shouldn't have occurred had the person been incarcerated on a previous event. And there was one case that was highlighted that actually it was a fatal shooting that occurred, and that individual had been arrested multiple times leading up to that shooting, and continually released because there wasn't adequate jail space. And so, yes, there is frustration on the part of the officers. It does lead to lowered morale. And it, again, ties to one of the 3 common themes, the absence of jail space or facilities, the absence of adequate facilities to operate from.
Thank you. Councilmember Ronning? I'm sorry, Wayne, were you done?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Ronning?
Thank you. So, Tom, I really liked your comments that you were sharing in regard to the additional type efforts of mental health and things like that versus going strictly to jail. And that's one of the things that we've been working with Chief St. John on a separate group about diversion tactics and things like that, and the ability to divert from jail. Eugene, Oregon has a great program in Cahoots, which is a community that we've been talking to. Yeah.
Cahoots.
Yeah.
That's one of them I was thinking.
Yeah, really great program. So one of the things, and this goes back to, I guess, the use of force and the training that John was answering for my question earlier. I was surprised to see, and maybe I missed it. And if I missed it, please, my apologies, and feel free to send me to the correct page. But I was surprised that there wasn't some type of conversation in here about the number of officer-involved shootings for Billings. We're very, very high in the country on those. Was there a specific reason why there wasn't that type of conversation within this report, or a conversation about that? Was that a conversation that was had here in Billings? If you could address that, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure. And we typically do not look at that detail in any of our studies. We would have to go back and look and evaluate all of those shootings to determine what the basis of the shooting was. And that's just something that's really beyond the scope of what it is that we do. Ours is really focused on staffing levels rather than individual incidents. The same is true with internal affairs investigations. While we'll look at the number of investigations, we never go in and look at the details of an investigation. We just don't go to that level of detail. It's really beyond what we normally would do.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
We do need to move to public comment, so let's do that. But Chris Kapilski, you had your hand up. Final word before
as maybe the calls start to come in. I want to emphasize, similar to Paulco, though we don't have a subscription with Center for Public Safety Management. Tom and I did talk Friday. Cities have longer term relationships. I don't expect this to be the last time we work with CPSM. It won't be at this extent, and he's sharing some information with us. They don't do this extensive of analysis year after year after year, but we are looking at what is the logical place at which we can continue this, learning and education, as well as, frankly, accountability for you guys on me with the police chief, and ultimately that we're implementing, recommendations and communicating back what's not working and what is. So it's not my intent that this would be a one and done any more than we don't do that with our water and wastewater, rate studies or facility studies. We spend $250,000 every 3 to 5 years on that kind of work. And this is, we all know, the single biggest property tax spend in our city is on public safety services. So this is a long-term relationship I think we need to continue to refine. So thank you.
Thank you. Council, I'm sure you'd have many other good questions. And after public comment, if you'd like to continue that, that'll be your opportunity. But we've had some very patient members of the public. Let's open up for public comment. Members of the public, that phone number, 237-6196. Please feel free to call that immediately. Again, we'll just ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes and tell us your name and address up front. It's also very important that you turn off your television or your computer screen, because what you're seeing broadcast is about a minute behind the actual meeting. And it's very confusing if you're hearing one thing out of one ear and another thing out of another ear. So turn those things down or off and just listen to your phone. Denise will take your call at 237-6196. You'll be put into a queue, and just be patient, and then you'll hear her on the phone, and we'll be sure to wait and get all the public comment. And number again, 237-6196, and that is a local Montana phone number, 237-6196. Just please make your comment. Sorry, we can't have a dialogue with questions, but please make your comment, and afterwards we'll be making notes. And if you do pose a question, we'll try to answer those once all of the comments come in. Denise, do we have anyone who is called 237-6196?
Yes, Mayor, I have Dan Brooks with the Chamber on the line. I'll put him on now. Mr. Brooks?
I'm here.
Thank you. Thanks for holding. We are ready to hear your public comment. You have 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. This is Dan Brooks with the Billings Chamber at 815 South 27th Street. Good evening, Mayor and members of council. I want to just start by acknowledging the good work of our police department and highlight a few findings from the CPSM report. Overall, the report states that our department provides quality law enforcement service to our community, specifically with the investigations division, despite excessive workload demands, has produced clearance rates similar to or better than the national average, save one category of crime. And the street crimes unit, which is able to engage in proactive policing, has, according to the report, produced impressive results. So I want to acknowledge and thank our police department for their great work. Reading through the report, you really understand the sentiment that we hear often from our officers of how they're continually doing more with less. Among other factors, lack of adequate staffing has led to ad hoc solutions that end up becoming standard operating procedures. Investigations department supervisors are taking on subordinates' caseloads, resulting in, less supervising, with workloads in the patrol division above the quote-unquote saturation level that the report identifies on page 69. Officers turn to a reactive mindset and downtime events that waiting for the next call rather than being proactive. So overall, I think the report is incredibly valuable. It offers significant insight and recommendations that should frankly all be acted upon. And I would offer our support in 3 key areas. The first, being support for a public safety mill levy that adds the required personnel, both civilian and sworn officers, to provide better efficiency and ultimately results in the public safety realm. Second, we'd like to work with council and the police department and our businesses to collaborate on a false alarm ordinance that makes sense for Billings. I'd also invite you all to travel with us to Omaha on our aspirational city visit, which we hope to take later this year. The focus of which will be on public safety initiatives that have proven successful in that community, and hopefully we can take some of those good ideas and replicate them in Billings. And then lastly, we'll continue our partnership with the BPD on SEPTED, but we would hope to expand the use of crime prevention through environmental design in Billings. This last area here is not obviously not a recommendation in the report, but we feel strongly that it is a powerful tool to reduce quality of life calls for service and allowing our officers to focus on other issues that our city faces. So thank you for your time. Have a good evening.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Hello, and thank you for your call. You've reached the public comment period for tonight's City Council meeting. You will have 3 minutes to give us your comment. May I have your name and address, please?
Yes, this is Carrie Boyder, and my address is 946 Yorkshire Court West in Billings, 59101.
Okay, Carrie, go ahead.
I want to thank the mayor and council for your time this evening, and thanks for this great data from the Center for Public Safety Management and the National Police Services Survey. There was one really common theme that stood out to me, and that was the need for more citizen and civilian involvement in policing. The National Police Services Survey said residents need a place to voice their opinions and concerns, and together the community and the agencies alike need a place for positive dialogue. And then the Center for Public Safety Management hit on this in numerous ways. The reserve officers, use of force review committees, records requests, staffing, and other things like that. The Office of Professional Standards, many areas where potentially civilian and citizen involvement could be beneficial to the city. So I just wanted to take this moment. Many of you know that I have been meeting with many members of the community, subject matter experts in the field, those directly impacted by policing, people who are involved in communities of color, and we have been discussing the need for a citizen police advisory board here in Billings. Now, this would not be the first time this has happened. This was organized previously by Police Chief Rich St. John in 2007 and met for several years. But we've discovered that there may be a need for such a thing today, and it was interesting because over the course of many months since last summer, we've been meeting to drill down on what would be the topics that a citizen police advisory board would look at. And they were very much the same to what you all heard tonight from the Center for Public Safety Management and the National Police Services Survey. Things like recruitment, retention, and workplace diversity, which Chief St. John has explicitly asked for help in. Community policing and diversion, such as the behavioral health alternatives, mobile crisis units, downtown emphasis patrols. We specifically zeroed in on data collection and analysis. This includes examining data from the surveys like tonight, as well as use of body cams, the public records requests, related storage of footage, and things like this. Community support and engagement, another area where Chief St. John is seeking support of a citizen police advisory board. And then, of course, the complexities of budget and funding concerns, city, county, and state coordination. One of the things I've been really proud about in these meetings with citizens is we've really partnered with the city. Chief St. John or someone from the police department has been at every single meeting with us citizens, looking at ways that we could partner together to build this relationship between the police department and the residents that it protects and serves. So we've had city administration at these meetings, the chief, members of council, city attorneys, and even the human resources director has been at our meetings. So I just wanted to really support the notion of a citizen police advisory board as a way to incorporate civilians into this process now, as you're trying to think about which of these 102 recommendations do we prioritize? And as the chief said, what can we do at no cost? Where could we really utilize the community to better use our resources so that the police staffing budget wouldn't have to be so high. So I just wanted to throw that support out there and also offer, as Councilmember Ronning mentioned, the City of Eugene, Oregon, it has an excellent model, both for mobile crisis units in cahoots, as well as numerous boards and oversight, including a funding board that looks at how do they bring in the dollars, because they also do not have a sales tax in Oregon. So they have a lot of very similar things that Billings has, and also their police department is the same size as Billings, even though their city is 160,000 people. So just wanted to make that push. I'd be happy to connect people if you all would like to learn more from the folks in Eugene. And then, happy to always talk with you more about the idea of a Citizens Police Advisory Board. Thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you, Carrie. Hello, and thank you for your call. You've reached the public comment period for tonight's City Council meeting. You'll have 3 minutes to give us your comment. May I have your name and address, please?
Sheena Duran, and PO Box 312, Billings, Montana 59107.
Okay, go ahead.
I would like to offer, we're a native, mostly Native community outreach that has been working on police community relations and reform and bringing awareness to social justices and racial issues, and like building on external communication between each place. I work for IPA and Warrior Women for Justice. We would like to offer services as far as getting a survey out. We could do a paper survey. We do like homeless outreach. We've been out there with them, like trying to figure out what can help with them. We're a nonprofit. And also on the body cameras, there is a grant for local and university law enforcement agencies that was just updated. It's the body worn recording equipment reimbursement grant that is available for any and all money spent by police officers on these equipment can be reimbursed. So it would be kind of like a win-win that it's not going to cost you get that money back. That can go towards more local storage from the police, for the police storage of body cams. And that's what I think.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Mayor, I am not receiving any more calls.
Okay, thank you, Denise. If somebody calls the next few seconds, please let us know.
Okay.
We'll then close the public comment period and come back to council. Before we move on to item number 2, our legislative update, Council, do you have any final questions for our presenters or staff, Chief St. John, or overall comments that you'd like to express? Councilmember Ronning.
Thank you. I just wanted to say again how I thought this information was extraordinarily valuable and truly appreciative of it. So thank you so much. And I just really wanted to give kudos to Chief St. John. I don't think it's easy being a leader and having a lot of things that you need to do differently suggested to you. That's not always the easiest thing to hear. And I think that he's been a remarkable leader within the department and has shown and implemented different areas of change within his department that just continues to make the department better, and really want to give him some kudos for his attitude towards this study and that he embraced the process. So wanted to thank him for that.
Thank you, Councilmember Ronning, and thank you, Chief St. John, and for your whole crew there. If anything else, I hope you hear appreciation by the council and the community tonight. We know you've got tough jobs. One other tough job is finding money for jail expansion. I think the need for that is clear. Before COVID-19, we didn't have enough jail space. Before our crime rate doubled, we didn't have enough jail space. The relatively small expansion of the jail that the county commissioners were able to cobble together, which we're very appreciative of, helps, but it still falls far short. I One option, of course, is to go back to the voters on that. But if I can add one small ray of hope, the American Rescue Plan is the $1.9 trillion package that was passed out of the House on Saturday. I had a meeting today with Senator Tester's office and others. The estimate is that the Senate will take up that debate on Wednesday, perhaps passing it as late as Thursday or Friday. My personal view is we don't need to be spending and borrowing another $1.9 trillion. But I'm not king of the world. And so if we go down that path, I think, we will have our hand out. And about $350 billion of that is earmarked for states, counties, and cities. The numbers that I have seen could mean that we could see tens of millions of dollars flowing to Yellowstone County and also to Billings. And because those are one-time dollars that we'll never see again, but jail expansion would be also a one-time expense, capital expense, recognizing, of course, it could add to operational expenses. I think that we need to start the communication with our county commissioners about this very real and obvious need. So I've started an email just to the commissioner to say, let's talk. And I would suggest that we keep our eyes open for that as a possible funding source for that kind of an expansion. It doesn't solve all the problems. There would have to be resources also for mental health care and diversion and substance abuse. But if you don't have a stick, it doesn't matter what kind of carrot you've got. So these things need to work together. With that, anything else before we move to item number 2, Council? Chris.
Could I just add, it fits too, but frankly, before we lose our CPSM support, and Poco, thank you again, to the mayor's comments. So today, and it's a small step, but we have been working directly with the new Department of Corrections director, former Sheriff Gutkin, the governor. You know, one of the great things about being in Montana, for those of you who aren't from Montana, is you get to have a first name relationship with governors, senators, etc. We've been really pleased with the administrative move to bring more resources, state resources, to Billings for oversight of our challenges. Our legislative piece passed the House today 100-0. So it is a small piece, but it is a bill that, again, requires the Department of Corrections to explain to the judge why they have not moved their prisoners out of our local jail if they haven't done it after 5 days. And we all know they're spending weeks, months, and sometimes even a year in local jails. So we are not, for anybody watching, we are not just sitting back saying, oh, the jail's not our issue. Our one and only piece of legislation is to help in this area. And we've got strong support across the board, including 100-0 vote about 5:30 tonight on its second reading on the House floor. So just thanks, and wanted to share that.
Thank you, Chris. You also remind me that last week I had a conversation with our DCI Division Chief or Division of Criminal Investigation, Brian Lockerbie, about the availability of funds for independent review of police-involved shootings. Councilmember Ronning made reference to 2020's absolutely unprecedented number of police-involved shootings. And although those have so far been found to be justified, there's no doubt that we lose credibility if we don't have an independent review process available. Typically, that would come out of Helena, but they do not have adequate resources. And so we're trying to set up a meeting, see how, if there's any way we can help them on the budgetary front. Chief St. John has been in communication with that division, and he fully supports those efforts. Whether anything will come of it, I can't say at this point, but that need is not being ignored. Thank you very much. I don't see anything else from Councilmember Treaky before we go to item number 2. Councilmember Treaky.
Do you have a call on hold?
I do. I just
Okay.
like your attention. She's been, I guess, on hold for a little bit. So I don't know what's going on with our phone system, but some people, it doesn't ring in right away and they claim that they've been on hold. So if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to put this person through.
Please do, Denise.
Thank you. This is Amanda Martin. Amanda?
Yes.
Hi, thank you for holding. We are ready to take your public comment. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Hi, I would just like to comment on and ask, are you, St. John, willing to find more local police training? He did state that I have Montana police training and whatever training they put on. And what is the time limit on releasing record requests? And do you plan on implementing time limitations on presenting records requests and public documents such as inquests and anything that can be released? And also, why haven't you looked into the detail on police-involved shootings? I mean, I know you guys do look into the police that have been shot. Also, and you guys look into everything else. It seems like a really important aspect to be looked on. Let me think. Okay. And also, I work for IPA and Warrior for Women as well. And we'd like to donate our services to surveys or anything that the BPD needed that is of no cost for community outreach. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure I got all those questions. There was quite a bit there. I don't know whether Chief or Gina Dahl, whether you were making note, or Kevin. Kevin, you put your screen on. There was a question about time for responding to record requests, progress on investigation on officer-involved shootings, I think, maybe some other things. Can you comment on any of those items?
Mayor and Council, I can comment on a couple of them. As far as the public records request, most of the time, we're filling those records requests within, 7 to 14 days. I believe the ones that were being brought up, from this caller, there's still an active investigation until the coroner's inquest is completed on those. So records can't be released until the finality of that. And then certainly whatever's public information after that point can be released. So some of the issue is just the active investigation and the inquest hasn't been completed yet. And as far as the other questions, I didn't catch any further after that. So.
Okay, thank you. Caller, please feel free to maybe email Assistant City Administrator Kevin Iflin with those more specific requests, and he can respond with a better answer there. Okay, I think Council will, again, thank all of our presenters. Much appreciated. Sorry to keep you up late, but trust me, it could be a lot later, and we know of which we speak. So
thank you.
Count yourself lucky in that way. Thank you. You can leave us again, and we hope to stay in contact with us and appreciate all your hard work, and may not be the end of this.
Mayor, I have an additional call coming in.
Okay, Denise, why don't we take this one last call, but because we don't really know exactly what our problems were before, but we'll have to call that the end. So okay. Last caller.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Small?
Yes.
Okay, you will have 3 minutes to give us your comment. This is Delano Small. Go ahead.
Okay. I would just like to address the subject on homelessness. How we are helpful on helping them get homes. It's hard to get a job without a home, And I do know a lady that was homeless and she had gas on her the other day.
They tried to report it.
She had tried to report it, but it gone unheard, pretty much. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Again, our public comment is closed. If anybody's listening and do have further comments they'd like to make, please feel free to send an email to all the council members. If you go to our city website, there's a simple way to do that. It goes to all members of the city council, and also the city administrators also see those emails. We welcome your comments as well as additional questions. Much appreciated, everybody. Again, you may sign off, and thanks again, and we'll move on to item number 2, legislative updates. Chris, I assume you'll lead us on that.
Thanks, Mayor, and I'm sorry if I could just make one reference correction, and actually it's not a correction. Any officer involved shooting is too many, right? 1, 2. We did have 2 that involved Billings PD. Some others in our community with other police departments. 1 is too many, 2 is too many. What was truly unprecedented, the chief just showed me today where we ended up for total homicides in Billings in 2020. That number shatters any previous record. And I think maybe we just might have misspoke referencing that relative to, I didn't want anybody thinking that shattered number of pushing almost 20 were officer involved shootings. So, but again, I'm not minimizing. Any one is too many. An officer never gets into law enforcement with the idea of wanting to find themselves in that situation. So, thank you. So the legislative update. This won't take long. It's an extremely busy week on the floor. But because transmittal deadline is just a couple of days away, Wednesday, for all non-monetary bills, I'll just use that term, whole flurry of activity over the last week. But this week, very few committee hearings. Most committee hearings, there's a few exceptions. Greg told me today, nothing that we're aware of yet that really affects directly some of the things we're working on. But the votes are going on the House of the floor, House and Senate floor to get bills over to the other side. So that's happening. I shared earlier that House Bill 578 passed after this meeting started 100-0. House Bill 255, or I'm sorry, I misspoke. House Bill 255 was our bill that cleared 100-0. If I've got that right.
Chris, House Bill 255 is Larry Brewster's bill on water district governance.
Thank you. I'm sorry. So I think I first spoke correctly. It was 578 that ours was 100-0. Larry's bill, also former Councilmember Brewster's bill, is made it over to the other side of the House. I'm going to deliberately stay away from specifics here and just say the team, staff, council, Greg, Amy, League of Cities worked on a number of bills, bad bills, this past session, half a session, and are thankful that at this point they've not made it over to the other side. So rather than call them out, I'll just say there were a number of continued attempts to take away local authority for land use decisions, revenue decisions, taxing decisions, and we're not doing too bad there. I don't want to get greedy. We are a long ways from done, but there was a lot of work there, kind of like a police officer, I guess. You can't prove the crime you prevented from happening. The number of bills out there that thankfully, hopefully won't continue further. I've got Amy and Greg both lined up to be with us on the 15th. So they'll be able to talk to us about what happened the first half, what passed and got through the transmittal deadline. I've also got them set up, one or both of them, for each of the work sessions in April as the session closes at the end of April or maybe the first week of May. So we will have them on our calls. My hope is we probably won't need more than 15 minutes, maybe a half hour tops, but they'll be able to let us know how are things coming. And I shared with them, and there was a flurry of activity around recreational marijuana, but none of that stuff is shaken out to really say what is what at this point. But on the 15th, we'll get kind of a full update from them. With that, I'll just gladly leave it to any questions that you guys have.
Thank you, Chris. Councilmember Ronning.
Thank you. This might be not so much a question, maybe more of a comment, but I think, granted, 578, I think is a really good bill. I think it serves throughout Montana very, very well, all the communities. But I guess I would like to highlight that one of the things I think why it's having so much success is the way we went about it. Is that we started to open up that communication, and we did open up that communication and had those meetings with the state legislators before they got to the state legislature. So my encouragement would be that, Chris, this is one of the things we talked about in the priorities last year, was having those quarterly meetings with our state legislators and our county commissioners. And we really make that a priority to begin talking and make it a point to talk and communicate with one another so that we're working more efficiently as governments that oversee much of the same population, but that we have a better coalition going forward into the next legislative session that's really working for Billings with the understanding of why they need to be.
Absolutely. No, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Other questions for Chris about all things Helena? Chris, do we know what the status of the guns and when we reopen, what we're looking at, or we can get a report, I guess, from Amy and Greg later, but there's not, at this point, there's no prohibition, or we have been preempted from prohibiting guns in City Hall and city meetings. Is that a correct summary?
So a number of bills, one in particular, passed strongly. However, the one you're referring to, I deliberately don't have an update for you tonight on that because there were a number of bills continuing, get traction, most notably one, and I apologize, I don't know its number, that would preclude you from making rules that would, interfere with some of the things that are happening this session. So until the session comes closer to an end, we really are not going to know what the terrain is going to look like. Chief St. John, Assistant Administrator Ifland have had numerous conversations about what do we need to be thinking about relative to employee safety, council safety, community safety in our city facilities, including council chambers, when we get back to meeting in person. So all that yet to come, unfortunately, along with marijuana and a number of other really hot topic issues for local government.
Thank you, Chris. I don't think the legislature is going to prevent open carry or concealed carry in bars. But if they do, I think we should consider opening a bar at City Hall for our next council meeting, and it might give us an option that we wouldn't have otherwise. So. Anything else for Chris before we adjourn, open up for public comment on non-agenda items? Don't see anything there, so we'll deem item number 2 concluded. And actually, we do have an item of general council discussion before we go to public comment on non-agenda items. Is there anything from the council that you'd like to cover before we do so? Don't see anything. So members of the public, if you...
I apologize. Did we do public comment on the legislative updates?
Oh, you're right. Thank you, Councilmember Shaw. We did not. And so since there were no items of council discussion, we'll do sort of a twofer here. Members of the public, if okay, Councilmember Yakowicz, do you want to comment?
Well, if you're going to skip council discussion, I want to get a report from Mr. Kukulski on the library.
Okay, thank you. Chris, why don't you do that, and then we'll open up public comment, and we'll combine that for anybody who would like to comment on the legislative update or public comment on non-agenda items. We'll do that together. But Chris, if you can comment on the library.
Yeah, we believe we're going to be able to test both the library and City Hall. Apparently, some of the equipment that's been installed started causing some skipping problems or stuttering or interference. And I just feel like until they've got the equipment, we've got to get in that room and start testing it. So we're going to do that later this week between Channel 7 staff to see exactly where we stand. And I think our first place might be back at City Hall versus the library as we continue to have some of these library challenges. That will further limit, I think, how many council members can be there. But frankly, maybe at some point you can give me a count. Maybe you can email me. I have a sense that there are only 3 to 5 who want to meet in person, 3 to 5 who do not want to meet in person, and a few of you in the middle. But we'll look at both the council chambers and the library to start testing with what they got in Friday with the equipment delivery and installation.
Thank you. Councilor Yakovich?
Yeah, Mr. Kukulski, are we, I guess I'm just a little bit frustrated with this going on. And if it's a contract issue or business issue, I just hope we could stay on top of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well understood. I will tell you, we are over a barrel with suppliers, back orders, and folks who are willing to help us in this realm. There's not a competitive environment of people to go to, just to be candid. Thank you.
Councilor Tricky.
I would add to that a big thing that has happened worldwide is the supply of computer chips. And because of all the people who are going to Zoom-like meetings, the demand for audio-visual equipment has been astronomical. I haven't seen anything like this since what happened to routers back in 2001. So what's going on right now is really not in the control, within our control. This is market issues that are going on globally.
Thank you very much. For anyone who has not heard, Montana will be receiving its first shipment of Johnson & Johnson vaccines next week. It's not real large, but that pipeline is now opening, and that's another positive development. Councilmember Nice, you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Chris, just to clarify the library issue, is that being handled in-house by our IT staff, or is that you got a contractor that you hired to do it? And
we have a relationship. We have a contractor, and then also it's a coordination with Community 7 and our IT. I mean, there really are 3 different parties working together to get this done.
Wow. Okay. All right. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. If there's nothing else, we will open for public comment to that phone number, 237-6196. Members of the public, this is your opportunity to comment on 2 different things. One, the legislative update that we had the report from Chris Kukulski on, anything related to that. But also, if you'd like to comment on anything that was not on our agenda tonight, anything else besides that, this is your opportunity. We'll again ask that you keep your comments to less than 3 minutes. Tell us your name and address up front. And also, please turn off or turn down your screen, your computer or your television, because our meeting is ahead of what you're hearing. It's very confusing. The number again, 237-6196. Call it immediately. If you'd like to comment on the legislative update that you've already heard or anything that was not on our agenda tonight. 237-6196. We'll just give a brief pause because, again, our meeting is ahead of what is broadcast to make sure that people have opportunity to call that number, 237-6196. Denise, do we have anyone who has called in this evening?
I have received no calls so far. I'll put so far.
Okay. So if you have no calls, then Denise, there's nothing else on our agenda tonight. Thank you, everyone. And thank you for working hard on our community's public safety. We are adjourned.